Part I. Finding your passion. 1. Why good work is no longer good enough. John was sure his life was on track. Upon graduation, a degree in computer science in hand, he had joined one of the world's great and iconic IT firms. They paid well, with generous benefits, and after 5 years of good performance reviews, he had been promoted to team manager. John was married, lived in a large house in an upscale neighborhood, and he and his spouse were talking about children. John had even begun making contributions to a retirement account. Charlene's life was in sharp contrast to John's. Though she excelled in science and math in high school, she chose to study sociology because it was about people, and math bored her. Upon her college graduation, the only job she was offered was at a call center. When she was told that if she worked there for 5 years, she might be promoted to be the team leader, she declined the position and went back to graduate school to continue her studies in sociology. When in doubt, go to school, had been her motto. Nearing her second graduation, Charlene found that her employment options included high school teacher, and little else. Ideally she would have researched this much earlier on, but more on that later. Charlene may not have been sure what she wanted exactly, but she knew with certainty that she did not want to be a high school teacher. To buy time, Charlene took a clerical job, filing and fetching. Today one of these people has upward momentum, financial success, and security, the other is stalled, with few opportunities for improvement. 1 is confident, 1 is apprehensive. Perhaps you think you already know which is which. But you are wrong if you think Charlene is the one who is doomed to struggle. Why John struggled, competition and the demise of the 9-to-5 ER. If this had been 1980, John's comfortable world would have been assured. But he was born too late. When his general manager asked to see him one day, John had no idea he was at risk. Indeed, it took a few minutes before John recognized he was being terminated. It made no sense. His company was growing and profitable, his performance reviews were favorable, he had done nothing wrong. The manager was vague, citing changing corporate priorities, and talked about severance. John was still numb when he read in the news media the following day that his employer had laid off hundreds of employees because their skills were deemed inadequate. Now John was mystified. He'd never failed at any task he was given, so how could he be judged to be deficient? Actually, there was little mystery about why John found himself in this difficult position. He'd been sucker punched by outside competition and kicked in the head by technology. The warning signs had long been there. Had John cared to notice them? For several years, the business media had covered his employer unfavorably. There was much commentary about the company missing recent new developments in IT, while other companies advanced on its markets. It was criticized for losing its competitive edge. In my conversation with John, it was clear that he had paid no attention to these concerns and was barely aware of them. We're still profitable, he noted, correctly. And I noted he was still saying we when, in fact, he was no longer part of the team. John went on to insist that since the company was profitable, the media criticism was unfair. Could it be, I suggested, that the company has finally concluded that the critique is valid? That future profitability is at risk? Maybe, he said. But it still doesn't make sense. If they're concerned about competition, why fire me, when I have tons of experience and always get my work done, and hire newer, less experienced people? In the media coverage about the terminations, there had been references to the company getting rid of the 9-to-5 ERS. I asked John if this description might have applied to him, and he said he didn't even know what it meant. It was time to get blunt. Only truth would serve John now. So I told him that the term was dismissive, implying that the 9-to-5 ER just puts in his time doing ordinary work, instead of aggressively using initiative to tackle whatever problem appears to be important. The company doesn't like that, John said firmly, referring to the aggressive initiator. But maybe that had changed. Maybe some of the executives were 9-to-5 ERS, and they were gone, too. John, I said, do you recognize that, by several measures, your former employer is losing to other, more nimble competitors? John's answer was maybe, indicating that he didn't see it. He had, unfortunately, taken his job for granted. He had chosen computing as a career because it was in such high demand. And having chosen computing, he'd figured there was nothing else to worry about. He would work as long as he chose. But look at all the evidence he had ignored. Is it evidence you are also ignoring? How could he or you discount the fact that, for much of the last 60 years, if you were a large and market-dominant company, you could expect to reign for decades? If you were General Motors, IBM, Sears, Kodak, US Steel, Polaroid, or Xerox, it would have been suicidal for competitors to attack you. And then, more swiftly than might have been imagined, Japanese imports suddenly destabilized the auto market of the former Big Three. IBM was blindsided by Microsoft and Intel. Technological advances pushed Kodak, Xerox, and Polaroid to the sidelines. Apple disrupted the established music industry, even as Uber destabilized the taxi/limo business. And these examples barely skim the surface. Here's what happened next. Microsoft suddenly faced competition from cloud computing and mobile devices. Google quickly found itself under pressure from Facebook, which was itself under pressure from instant messaging services. If you don't grasp just how quickly this all happened, then you don't understand how gentle the past was. Dominance was supposed to last many decades, not just a few decades or even sometimes just one. Most of this disruption happened in John's lifetime, and even a superficial knowledge of the past would have helped him see the future. Please understand, I was not trying to make John feel badly about himself. He felt terrible enough already, and his self-confidence was seriously damaged. His confidence hadn't collapsed yet, but I feared it would when he started his job search. The conversation with John was painful, and I have had more than one such conversation. Many more than one. You can see, I think, why I decided it would be wrong to tell him about Charlene's success. He wasn't yet ready to hear about it. Why Charlene thrived, change and the ever-demanding consumer. Charlene had needed no one to tell her about the force of competition. She knew that if she was going to get a job as a sociologist that did not involve teaching, she'd face intense competition. Or do you think a sociology major should take any half-decent job offered? You can imagine Charlene's anxious parents having that point of view, encouraging her to grasp at the low-hanging fruit. They may have been eager for her to use her major and start on a path to repaying her loans. What could be wrong with that? But Charlene had ambition. She wanted a great job, a great career. And so she focused on both her goal and the means to achieve it. Charlene found the history of social change fascinating. All of it was interesting to her. Technical change interested her as much as shifts in cultural norms. In spite of the fact that she couldn't write a line of code, she understood the transformative force of computing and its social and commercial potential far better than John had. That gave her the first step in her job search. If change was her primary interest, then she should gravitate toward the source of greatest visible change, the tech sector. For Charlene, it was obvious that the consumer was becoming ever more demanding, wanting better products, not just more of them. Now quality was as desirable as quantity. It used to be that people were simply happy to have food. No longer food must be fresh, free of pesticides, locally raised, ecologically harvested, and 1% of the profit must support charity. And in the quieter past, a car was a car. But competition told consumers they could demand cars that lasted longer, so warranties lengthened. Then they wanted cars that came with roadside assistance. Then the cars had to be capable of parking themselves, and so it goes for all products and services. Phones are no longer permitted to be dumb. They must be able to hear and speak, tell us where we need to go and how to get there. They must entertain us and reheat our afternoon snack. And never, ever must our products bore us. Oh, and even with all of this, we expect our products to be easily affordable. Charlene saw change through this wider lens, but in truth, most of my students do not. If you text, sext, tweet, browse, surf, and selfie, it's easy to believe you are a master of technology. But really, all that means is that you're a master of today's technology. What about yesterday's? Understanding what used to be is critical for grasping technology's impact and pace. Looking back to understand the way forward was in fact Charlene's specialty. Action versus reaction. Charlene never saw a job posting for what she wanted to do, so there was no other choice but to wait until. No, wait, that's yesterday's response. Here's what Charlene did instead: she took action. Charlene began to write about technological change and the consumer, posting blogs wherever her techie friends suggested. A few unpaid magazine articles followed. Charlene haunted tech networking events. Finally, a small firm that was told that their marketing materials lacked punch hired her part-time to give them something cool to say. Charlene gave them an almost poetic description of their product that whet consumers' appetites. What was John doing while Charlene was laying the groundwork for a great career? He was reacting. At his former job, he'd spent his time writing code, laying the groundwork to write even more code. Now that he was no longer employed, he still wasn't concerned enough to take action. He was still in reaction mode. What had happened to him, he felt, was an unfair bump in the road, but since he was an IT guy, another job should be reasonably easy to get. It would take a couple of months at most, he thought, and his spouse and savings would keep them afloat until he started working again. But then it got complicated. They couldn't afford to put his wife's job at risk, so moving to another city did not seem wise in the short term. Excluding his employer, there weren't many large IT firms in the area. He approached them all, some of whom were on record as complaining about IT shortages in the tech sector. John got interviews, but as it turned out, the firms were looking for newer specializations, like cloud computing and deep data mining. John pointed out that his skills were broad-based and he could learn whatever specialties he needed. While the interviewers nodded and said they would keep him in mind, John was acutely aware that in the reception lobby, a number of younger, just graduated faces waited for their turn to interview. John reassured himself, figuring that even if those new graduates had taken courses in cloud computing, they didn't have his depth of experience. Too bad it wasn't experience that mattered. Even worse, the reality of his termination hovered over the interview. Was he a 9-to-5 ER? If his big employer, who could carry some dead weight, didn't want him, why would a new employer take a chance on him? Finally, John got a job offer at a small inventory software firm, at half his former salary. He had always judged his self-worth according to his income, and was devastated. But what choice did he have? Charlene, meanwhile, had moved to a mid-sized tech firm, using her sociology background to help them craft their array of social media products. And here again, Charlene's education paid off. She was never happier than when she was trying to understand why some cultural practices that had been around for centuries changed in just a generation. For instance, she obsessed over how women had entered the urban labor force in unprecedented numbers and in occupations in which they had previously been almost absent. She wanted to understand why corporate loyalty had diminished so quickly that the young did not even know it used to exist. It was a slow realization, but Charlene saw her interest in social change fit another great cultural change of its own: the growth in the importance of social media. Who better to understand and use it than Charlene? She saw the fortunes of history flowing toward her. John saw them ebbing away from him. John's re-education. John returned to see me just as he was to take his 50% wage cut. He wanted some tips for networking to find something better. I suggested that what he really needed to do was a strategic rethink. No, I don't need that, I just have to get something that pays better, he said. Finally, there was no choice but to openly tell him that his employment challenge was systemic. Unless he was prepared to address it, further conversation would be a waste of time. John looked very displeased, but he Made no move to leave. I needed to offer John some context, so I told him I'd spent much of my early childhood on a farm too remote for electricity, where entertainment was a battery-operated radio, and where the telephone was a party line, shared with another dozen families. There was no running water and my mother and grandmother cooked on a wood stove. John looked as surprised as if I had told him I was a Martian. When I was a kid, I continued, cars froze up in the winter, and long-distance calls were so expensive they were made only for emergencies. Television, jet airplanes, mainframe computers, personal computers, organ transplants, genetic engineering, DNA testing, in vitro fertilization, computer animation, and the internet arrived in my lifetime. But why do you think I'm telling you this? So I'll know you've seen lots of change? John suggested. No, I said. I'm telling you this because you will see even greater changes. The workforce has changed just as dramatically, and I explained this to John, too. In my youth, I had my choice of good jobs. A simple interview got you an offer, since the interviewer was really just interested in whether there was something obviously wrong with you. You were offered adequate pay, a job for life unless you were a total screw-up, and you retired with a defined benefits plan that guaranteed your income. Financial markets were quiet and predictable, so all you had to do was save and you had an easily assured way to build some additional wealth. Typical jobs now involve wages that barely rise, workloads that leave nothing but the scraps of a personal life, and stress that grows daily. The odds of finding a good career are fading fast, and all because of economic competition. Since I'm an economist, I reminded John, I naturally think about competition quite a lot. Competitive pressures keep rising, and they aren't going to stop in this century. The number of competing countries, companies, and workers continues to increase. If by some miracle the number of competitors were to stop rising, technological change would continue. A single technical change could disrupt an entire industry and quickly disadvantage its existing companies and employees. The truth is that competition and technology are dancing together to an ever faster beat. John had no choice but to dance along, and you have no choice, either. A new strategy. Even though the duo of competition and technology is a defining characteristic of our age, much commented upon, people don't really do anything about it. It doesn't affect the way they think, or the way they approach their careers. For John and many others, competition, technology, and the blistering pace of change are no more than words spoken casually in a bar. Now it was time to tell John about Charlene. I explained her background and noted that she had just been hired for a high-profile job with a rapidly expanding social media company. Predictably enough, John asked if I was recommending that he try to get a job in social media. Do you find social media fascinating? I asked. Not exactly, no. And with neither relevant education nor experience, could you compete with Charlene and those like her? Well, no, he replied. Exactly. I'm not recommending Charlene's particular choice for you, but her strategy. For the first time since he'd entered my office that day, John smiled. At last, he was ready to talk about career strategy. We began with a review of what doesn't work, which covered most of the things most people actually do. The kinds of career plans I see would do justice to John's grandparents. Most people just do what everyone else with the same job in mind does, get the same education, acquire the same skills, build the same resume, and provide the same answers to interview questions. The strategy most often employed is this: get an education. More competition? Get more education. More competition? Get some relevant experience. More competition? Get even more experience. But everyone else is adding experience at the same rate. Believing you can advance your career solely by celebrating another birthday does not seem a very sophisticated strategy for the 21st century. I asked John what the flaw of this approach was. He understood that the primary problem was that almost everyone else was doing it. The only way it could work is if you outlasted everyone, career by endurance. Think about the consequences, I said. As the situation becomes ever More competitive, you make yourself like everyone else? In what world would that make sense? You've essentially made yourself into a commodity, and one that's interchangeable. And the commodity worker is bid down to the lowest price possible. John now saw where his wage cut came from. I definitely don't want to be a commodity, John said emphatically. Great, I replied. Let's talk about how you become a star. Before we got into the details of a better career strategy, John first needed to understand his destination, not a job, not a good job, not even a great job. He should aim instead for a great career. A career is great when it offers satisfying work, impact on the world, a dependable and adequate income, and personal freedom. If John had a great career, defined in this way, he wouldn't have to worry about being fired. If he was using his skills in the service of work that was satisfying and meaningful to him, he would not be a replaceable cog or commodity, but an exceptional asset whose contributions could not be replicated. He would have an edge. True, you don't become a star like this quickly. But you will never become a star if you don't even know that's your objective, or if every aspect of your career plan isn't focused on becoming exceptional. So what would John do to create edge? While I will discuss what people like John need to do in the following chapters, it all begins with one simple question: can you create any significant degree of credible edge without a passionate interest in the work itself? Can you imagine creating this edge? This commanding competitive advantage that will survive your working life without such passion? How could you bring the intensity of purpose and commitment that is necessary without passion? How will you compete with those who have real passion? Jake's Jobs, a choose-your-own adventure. Let me tell you a story about my good friend Jake, because you need to embark on your career journey with a healthy dose of reality, but an equally healthy dose of vision. Jake loves his work, and his employer loves him. He is so valuable an employee that Jake has job security for as long as he'd like to keep the job. But his career didn't start out that way. Indeed, at one time, it looked like Jake would be roadkill, collateral damage in the brutal labor markets of the 21st century. No matter what Jake had tried in his career, it hadn't worked out. After college graduation, he got an excellent job at a multi-billion-dollar telecommunications company. It wasn't that he loved the job or the field of telecommunications. Rather, the job paid well, it was available, and the seemingly stable company was willing to train him. What's to think about? So he didn't think. He just took it, and started down a path. Sounds a little like John, doesn't he? Jake built up his experience and underwent extensive training in emerging new communications technology. He even fell under the protection of a powerful union. He was seemingly set for life. Unfortunately, under the pressure of rapidly changing technology and fleet-footed competitors, Jake's employer stumbled and then crashed, taking Jake along with it. Since the entire telecom industry was in upheaval, no one was hiring. So Jake's experience was of no immediate value, and the technology was moving so quickly that his experience soon became obsolete. What to do? Jake was no quitter. He took stock of his transferable skills and landed a job in logistics in the packaged goods industry. This time, the pay wasn't as good, but it was a decent job with security. We'll always need logistics, right? Well, no, not exactly. With an economic slowdown and rising competitive pressure, the packaged goods industry went through a bout of consolidation, and Jake was unemployed again. Jake took a couple of junk day jobs, one as a loading dock laborer, another as a furniture mover, as he upgraded his computer skills. Using the standard career playbook, Jake networked and applied relentlessly. Then he scored a job as logistics manager for a North American manufacturer with a quality product in high demand. Finally, Jake was sure his career was back on track. Barely a year after Jake started, Chinese manufacturers discovered the product category and entered with a much lower price. Jake's company collapsed over the next 2 years, leaving Jake looking for work yet again. Jake was in a race with both technology and competition, and each time he was ahead, he got slapped down. He felt like there was a monster following him. I can only imagine the pressure he felt as his family's primary breadwinner. From his highest salary, his income had eroded by more than a third. There were two paths before him. In path number 1, Jake says, "Screw this. I'm done trying." He puts his head down. "I'll just be an administrative assistant or something, and accept that. I'll never own a house or a car, or be able to afford an indulgence like a motorcycle. I'll be careful with money, give everything I earn to my kids' welfare, and we'll somehow be okay." In other words, he capitulates to competition. What kind of life would that be? Grayer than gray. And yet I see so many people choosing path number 1. Path number 1 makes me twitch. I'm pleased to say that Jake followed path number 2. Jake was smart and thoughtful, and, even more importantly, he wasn't a quitter. First, he thought he'd look for an industry where there wasn't competition. It wouldn't be glamorous, but it would be safe. But then he noticed something. You see, his job situation meant that he was spending a lot more time at home during this period, and seeing his kids a lot. He watched the way his 9-year-old daughter was fearless. She tried everything, from kickboxing to gymnastics to debate to science decathlons. She failed at some of them, but she shrugged it off and moved on. She was intrepid and she was resilient. Jake wondered what message he would be sending her if he just retreated to safe. More than his daughter's influence, though, Jake came to realize that there was no place to hide from competition. In every area he explored, he saw that even if it was a safe zone now, there was nothing to suggest it would remain so. He knew that better than most. As long as he was running away from competition, he realized, he was going to lose. Instead, he would run toward competition. He would make competition an asset, instead of the monster constantly stalking him. With this new mindset, he first asked himself, what will always be important in a competitive market? Salesmanship. Because as competition rises, you need someone who can sell better than the others. Second, he wondered what he could sell. He was passionate about travel, though he hadn't been able to do it as much as he'd have liked. But how to sell travel? He remembered he and his wife had once sat in on a timeshare presentation, and he hadn't been able to stop thinking about how he'd have done it differently. Once he had a handle on what he'd like to sell, he wondered what kind of timeshare salesperson he could be. He'd never sold before, but he knew he was a good people person. He frequently received feedback that he was easy to talk to, which he attributed to the fact that he was genuinely interested in people. He was friendly and funny, and he looked people in the eye when he talked to them. He was the kind of person who was always asked to speak at weddings. All of this also meant he was a smooth networker, only it wasn't even networking, because he just naturally gravitated to new people and loved talking with them. Finally, Jake needed to determine how he might get such a job. For one, he had a strong network of friends who might know someone who could help him enter the field. He also realized that sales is one of those relatively easy areas in which to prove yourself. Jake read voraciously to understand the travel and tourism market. Then he found someone willing to entertain the idea of hiring him and said, "Let me try, and judge me on my performance." He believed in himself, and so he set up a test. It was a brilliant strategy, and it worked. Jake's business is now mainly referrals from past customers, which, as any business person knows, are gold. He frequently travels to see areas his clients are particularly interested in, so that he can speak in an educated manner about those locales. He has developed a specialty for timeshares and second homes in the British Virgin Islands, an area of the world he loves. He is a top earner at his company. And even if the market falls, he will outlast most of the competition because he is just that good at what he does. And if he ever needs to, he knows he can always sell something else. For again, in a competitive market, there will always be salespeople. Finally, Jake had work he enjoyed and a clear strategy to sustain his success. Charlene, too, was pursuing a passionate interest and was rewarded with career success. John, by contrast, was looking for no more than a job, and was struggling as a result. Jake does not appear again in this book, yet he is everywhere in this book. His is a classic great career success story, one that has absolutely nothing to do with luck and everything to do with an analytical approach, a methodical process, and determination. The rest of the book will show you how, while you might feel tempted to take path number 1, the path of least resistance, path number 2 leads to a great career. One of my former students, Harut, wrote to me recently about some changes in his job, and I found in his email a timely comment to sum up the central message of Chapter 1 and, indeed, of this book. The company has been shifting to an outsourcing model for years, he wrote. Soon only knowledgeable staff who review and evaluate outside tenders' proposals will remain. I thought I had found a good job and a good career, but they're disappearing. Now, I will be forced to have a great one. Hard questions, honest answers. One look at the path you're on now. How did you get here? Was it because it was easy, or because it was where you wanted to be? 2. Why safe jobs are a myth. Not long ago, I attended a retirement celebration dinner for a good friend, who was a judge. Though the environment was festive, there was also some sadness. You see, this friend loved his job. Many of the people attending the dinner also loved their jobs, and so they understood the mixed blessing that would come with retirement. What will he do without his work? One friend sitting at my table asked. And I knew she meant it not in the how will he fill his time respect, for he had plenty of exciting things lined up. But his love for his job was such that leaving it represented a real loss. Believe it or not, I try not to lecture everyone I meet. But since the subject was so applicable to the way I spend my days, I added, I know his passion for his work is remarkable. It's that kind of passion that I'm always telling my students they must pursue. The woman sitting next to me, whom I did not know very well, became instantly offended. That is terrible, dangerous advice, she said. That's advice to leave kids unemployed. So swift and strong was her reaction that I understood she probably had a son or a daughter looking to find his or her way, perhaps living in the family basement while cobbling together shifts at the local pizza joint. No doubt she worried for her child, wanting more than anything to see her offspring become a self-supporting member of society. I was not surprised to hear her argument, for it's a common one. Refrains I hear most often include, chasing passion is like chasing an unrealizable dream. Or in this economy, there's no room for passion, it's all about skill. If you develop a skill, you'll love your work. I had the good sense not to make our table mates even more uncomfortable by thrusting them into the middle of a debate, and so I merely smiled at the woman next to me, suggested we saw passion differently, and changed the subject. So, instead of speaking my mind that night, I saved everything I would have loved to say for this chapter. I can't anticipate every argument of my detractors, but there are a few I've heard enough to know by heart. I've included them here, as well as my responses. Informing all of my replies, of course, was the hard truth I laid out in Chapter 1, that in this competitive economy, there is no good career. With that as my base note, the arguments below take on the tinny sound of a single high note easy to overpower. Argument number 1, every passionate career needs a backup plan. Part of why I did not come down too hard on my dinner companion was that I understood why she was upset. Parents want only the best for their kids. They do not want to see their children suffer or struggle with unemployment. I certainly wouldn't want that for my children or for any of the students I've advised. In other words, this mother and I were coming from the same place, one of love and a desire to protect our children. But how to go about girding our children against hardship is where our approaches diverge dramatically. For instance, let's talk about the backup plan. Even those parents who entertain the idea of their children finding their passions are known to advise, go ahead and find your passion, but just be sure you have something to fall back on. This refrain might be the most common one in the parental songbook. By something, they mean a skill. And by skill, they probably mean something safe like dentistry or Bookkeeping. Again, this argument is perfectly understandable. Just as, when children are young, you suggest they bring a coat just in case the weather gets bad. When they're older, you also want them to be prepared. But the backup plan is not equivalent to the extra layer of clothing on a temperamental spring day. The backup plan, you see, actually sets the individual back instead of protecting her or pushing her forward. It's a detour, and one that might take your youngster completely off course. I had a debate on the matter with my student Henry, whose plan was to pursue his skill as a backup plan. In this case, the skill was cloud computing. His passion, however, was writing. Henry came to see me frustrated, because he was trailing his computing classmates on the grade front. "Are you passionate about the cloud, then?" I asked. "I don't know. It's sort of interesting." "Ah. And are you going to pursue your writing career while you're also pursuing your career in cloud computing? Or do you plan to pursue computing first, and then writing?" Again, Henry wasn't sure, but he was leaning toward the latter. "Let me ask you something, Henry. How long do you plan to live?" "Exactly." What? We are talking about your life, are we not?" I told him that his plan is. He'd explained it to me could take a long time, a very long time. "And do you intend to put the rest of your life on hold in the meanwhile?" "I don't understand," he said. And so I walked him through it. I could see him pursuing his skill, cloud computing, and then getting a job using his skill. But then, when he decided he had his backup plan all well and established and was now ready to pursue his passion, writing, he might have to return to school to be trained for it. Would he really be prepared to do that? What if, in the meanwhile, he met someone he'd like to marry? Would he be willing to pursue marriage and his writing career at once? Would the lucky lady be open to him doing so? Assuming she gave him her blessing to take on student debt so he could chase his dreams, what would he do if they decided to have kids? In short, while I don't actually believe you are ever too old to begin pursuing your passion, there's no denying that it's simpler and easier if you do so from the start. As people get older, life does get more complicated. What happens to so many, and what I was certain would happen to Henry, is that the passion plan is tucked away, never to emerge again. Indeed, I feared Henry would be back in my office several years down the road, distressed and very possibly depressed because he took no satisfaction in his work and felt trapped by it. The backup plan appears sensible, appears safe, and therein lies its great danger. The backup plan is the thick mud that lies between you and your true passions. You don't intend to get stuck there, and you're sure you'll only be stronger for having pushed through it. But you do get stuck. What was supposed to have given you security has only slowed your real progress. I know this because of how often I see it. My student Allie began a graduate program in library science because she presumed she'd enjoy it. Once she'd enrolled, she felt stuck. She could tell from the first semester of classes that library school had been the wrong choice for her, but she remained. She explained, "Well, I started it. I needed to finish." When she graduated, she was qualified to work as a librarian, and she did so, even though she hated it. Unfortunately, many people make the same choice, to pursue something solely because they started it. Indeed, that is the most common reason students give me when I ask why they finished something they had long known was not right for them. A fellow named Brad learned this lesson the hard way and wrote to me about it. He explained that focusing first on security and money in the hopes that passion and happiness will come later in life makes finding happiness more complicated than it should be. It's far inferior to taking a direct route to your passion and happiness, he wrote. One thing I don't think enough people realize is that it's going to be much harder to find a passion if you never deviate from the same routine. Most people are such creatures of habit, and afraid to step out of their comfort zone, that they will never get the exposure to something new that might lead to a passion. You see, then, that although the backup plan is filled with good intentions, it leads to unhappiness all too easily. A young woman named Sabrina, who saw me speak on this subject, wrote, "I chose the next part of My career based on a passion for stem cells that I have harbored in my father had nurtured since I was 8. Before watching your video, I was hesitant to pursue my choice as I felt compelled to apply to professional schools like dentistry and optometry like my peers, solely for job stability and economics, even though what a dull and boring life that would be for me. My father could have benefited from your speech 21 years ago, because he chose the economic route, and now he is paying for it. He routinely describes his career as a high workload, high stress, blood-sucking, soul-destroying kind of job. Reader, allow me to ask you this, since we are protective of our children, why would we send them on a blood-sucking and soul-destroying path? Argument number 2, the current market demands high skills, not passion. The argument seems quite clear: pick a skill that is in demand and acquire it through education, training, and experience. We have to take this view seriously, because it is the view of the majority of people. Passion. Advocates like myself can make a lot of noise, but those who put passion first are in the minority. As I noted in Chapter 1, competitive pressures have increased and will continue doing so, with the labor market becoming ever more challenging. Unskilled work is almost completely disappearing, transferred to the realm of robots. So of course skill seems like the way forward, and the more skill, the better. But here's the problem with that argument: many people focus on the competitiveness of today's labor market and pay no attention to what the market will look like 15 years from now, never mind 50 years from now. Anytime I look at a young face, I must look to the next 50 years, or I may as well keep my mouth shut completely, which I've never been particularly good at. And when you look at the next 50 years, you see, the skills first argument makes little sense. Let's assume you look at skilled jobs where there's a lot of hiring going on, like high-tech or medicine. That should mean the skill is in growing demand and there will be a place for you when you complete your training, right? No, not at all. That approach has blown up in people's faces repeatedly, because what is hot now will not be so tomorrow. Consider these examples: a young man in high school is barely passing, so the school tells his parents he likes working with his hands and should learn a trade. He likes cars, so he chooses to be a car mechanic. There will always be cars to repair, right? He starts his training as an apprentice, and figures he's set for life. The young guy is so happy. Cars, girls, and big bucks. He's on his way. Then the automakers build cars to a much higher standard of quality, and relatively fewer repairs are needed. Electronics replace mechanical parts. The shortage of car mechanics suddenly disappears, if there ever was one. It's called the advance of technology. It's the 1990s, the internet is being built out for the first time. There's a shortage of telecommunications engineers, and the telecoms tell universities to expand their telecommunications degree programs as fast as possible or risk slowing the progress of the internet. The telecom classes become packed. Then the internet bust occurs. The telecoms overbuilt and overhired. Telecommunications engineers everywhere are released to pursue opportunities elsewhere. They have wonderful resumes for telecom, and for nothing else. They had bet on skill in a technology, and both the technology and the marketplace moved on. People said, don't worry, just wait it out. The marketplace will improve. The internet will continue expanding. Yes, and that does happen, but it takes 5 years. 5 years is a long time when you have a kid to support and a mortgage to pay. Plus, when things pick up again 5 years later, the telecom students of the late 1990s will be behind. The internet has changed rapidly, and it's the new crop of telecom grads who get the new wave of jobs. Generations have believed the job of high school teacher to be a safe, skilled choice. We'll always need teachers, right? No. In most of the industrial world, including the United States, the birth rate has fallen substantially and the population is slowing or starting to decline. This means that, in the absence of immigration, the number of children will decrease. And suddenly we will need fewer teachers because there are fewer children. You get my point. I'm sure. The list of hot jobs, hot skills that suddenly grew cold is long indeed. Website designers were in short supply at first. And now a kid with software can whip up a credible site. Webmasters were replaced by social media masters, who will be replaced by something we don't even know about yet. As I write this, deep data mining specialists are in short supply. But for how long? In the pursuit of safe, well-paying jobs, immigrant families in particular often herd their children into what they see as the best possible choice, a high-skill regulated profession. By this I mean physicians, lawyers, engineers, and accountants, all of whom must be licensed to practice, and all of whose work is essential. This route seems ideal to the immigrant parents who took substantial and personal risks to improve the lives of their children, who now are supposed to take no risks at all. Leaving aside the inconsistency of the approach, risk-taking parents who are surprised they raised risk-taking children, all the traditional professions are under siege by technology and global competition. Legal and accounting work gets either absorbed by software or outsourced to lower-wage countries. Regulations change and move some of the physicians' work to nurse practitioners or pharmacists. You may have heard a lot of talk about the so-called STEM shortage. STEM refers to occupations based on science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. Students are often urged to enter these fields, and jobs are presumably available. But are they really? Is biology in as much demand as botany? Are computer scientists in as much demand as pure math graduates? In fact, STEM is too blunt to be of any particular value. Any particular skill set is subject to becoming obsolete with little notice. And any career coach who does not account for the forces of both competition and technology is providing advice for the moment, not for a lifetime. Let's say you don't buy my argument that careers of tomorrow are anyone's guess. So you go directly to the best source of American job data, the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, BLS. As it happens, the BLS does try to predict the future. As of January 8, 2014, it estimated which occupations would grow fastest over the period 2012 to 2022. The top 20 occupations are a remarkable collection of jobs, with widely varying skill levels. They include industrial psychologists, number 1, insulation workers, number 4, occupational therapy assistants, number 8, electrician's helper, number 15, and medical secretaries. Number 19. Those are the fastest growing, but what about the occupations that will add the greatest number of absolute jobs during the same time period? The list includes registered nurses, number 2, retail salespersons, number 3, food preparation and serving workers, including fast food, number 5, customer service representatives, number 8, janitors and cleaners, number 9, and construction laborers. Number 10. This list is not exactly a triumph of skilled work. Most offer relatively low pay. Again, this is because good jobs are disappearing, and this list is what's left. Moreover, while the BLS uses a credible model for making these predictions, it explicitly doesn't include any forecast of FN1. Disruptive technological change. Living in our times, it's hard to imagine there won't be some level of disruptive change. All of this means that I have to tell the young that they live in a tumultuously dynamic world, where old answers no longer make sense and easy answers are hard to find. I need to remind them that when we look at the history of occupations, we used to see constant change. Now we see accelerating change. So do we ignore our history or try to deny it? This much is clear for sure. If we tell the young to pick a skill for a great career, we must be prepared to answer when they ask which skill. And, as I hope you see now, we simply cannot. Argument number 3, you're wasting time looking for a passion when you should just be doing something. Don't succumb to paralysis by analysis, say the many people who argue with my point of view. Action is required, not thought. Just start with what you can actually do and at least acquire some entry-level skills. Then, the argument goes, work hard, with discipline and focus, and build mastery. As You do, you will become more valuable as an employee, and that value will offer rewards. As a bonus, you might actually come to enjoy the work involved. This all sounds plausible, until you actually think about it. So let's be rebels and think about it. First, where are you going to find this low-hanging fruit that will start your campaign for mastery? A subject you're good at in school. That's what many, maybe most of my students have done. But already we have a problem. High school subjects, quite properly, provide some foundational skills that apply to many occupations. So to be good at a high school subject, or several of them, leaves a very wide range of choices. So where to start? The subject with the highest grades? That means you believe high school marks are much more accurate than even the teachers believe. And what about all the skills never addressed in high school? This same argument, by the way, applies to both colleges and universities. Maybe you start your campaign by taking whatever job you can talk someone into giving you, or the highest paying job you can get. This means FN2. Your starting point in your skill strategy is near random, which makes no sense for such an important decision. You may be starting somewhere half plausible, but where is the assurance that you've started at the place that leads to success fastest or most reliably? There isn't any, and I can hear the little ball bouncing on the roulette wheel of your life. As much as pro skill people criticize the passion philosophy as irresponsible, I can't help but think that this random spinning of the wheel is much more reckless. This argument always makes me think of Jack. He is the first generation son of immigrants, and he knew his passion was product development. He wanted to have a hand in creating something, an opportunity to use his inventiveness. But when he graduated, he was seduced, as were his parents, by a job, not as a developer, with high status and immediate income. 5 years later, he called me and said he felt trapped. We discussed how to find a job that allowed him to be an innovator. He was understandably anxious about making a shift. He had recently become a father, which was part of what made him anxious. And he had years of his parents' guidance in his head. But his newborn son helped make the decision for him. I asked, what will you say to your son when he faces a critical decision? Will you be able to say, do as I say? Or do what I did? Seeing it from this point of view, Jack knew he would not recommend the roulette wheel approach. And so he resolved to move his own fate elsewhere. Argument number 4, if you develop great skill, then your passion will follow. One of the most common arguments in favor of pursuing a skill first is that passion will come from mastering that skill. Sure, some people might actually come to have passion for their work, even though they chose it looking simply to build skill. But that's not assured, and those who find their passion this way do so accidentally. Luck has entered the fray, and as you will learn, I am not a fan of relying on luck. In short, I wholly disagree with the find your skill and the passion will follow approach. Susan was a seriously high-achieving high school student. She was active in the school community and was a team athlete. She had a good mind and admirable discipline, and she excelled at all her school subjects. She could have entered many different programs of further study, but she chose accounting only because it was the most difficult to get into. I see this all the time, by the way, and it makes me crazy. Really strong students choose the most competitive programs to apply to, not because they care about the subject but because they naively assume that, if the admission standards are the highest, the job opportunities must be the best. Unsurprisingly, she was admitted. At university, Susan was still the good and diligent student who maintained a high-class standing. But when she came to see me, she was concerned. Each year, she told me, it was harder to maintain her focus. Why? I asked. I just don't care about the subject, she replied. What should I have told this good student? Just double down and one magical day you will achieve the joy of mastery. And then, you'll care. No, I couldn't say such a thing. That would be like saying her feelings don't matter, and that she must soldier on. But if she doesn't care about financial analysis, why would the mastery of it give her satisfaction? I will concede that mastery is a good feeling, and most of us enjoy having a sense of accomplishment, any kind of accomplishment, a game of golf well played and our golf buddies in awe, a meal superbly prepared, a set of financial statements presented without a single loophole. All such endeavors can be rewarded with that sense of mastery. Since I am severely challenged by the simplest household repair task, I am energized when I manage to reattach a stray piece of wall molding. But do we really want to compare this general "I am not a total screw-up" feeling with the profound satisfaction of a valuable achievement? When we accomplish work that we care about, something that is important to us and to others, this feeling outstrips the power of random mastery. It must be important to others or it is hardly a job for which you earn reward. If you don't see how the pleasure of incidental mastery and the satisfaction of work accomplished differ, then you haven't experienced the latter for yourself. The counter-argument, your trusty professor goes on the offensive. Now that I've hopefully trashed these most common arguments, let's take a look at why I think passion protects, why passion is that extra layer of clothing on the temperamental spring day. Let's return to Susan, the accounting student, for a moment. When she said, "I just don't care about the subject," what did I tell her? I said she must try to maximize her talent, and to do that, I challenged her to find the domain she cared about. I told her to try to be the best she could be, to find a career domain and to make sure her impact was as significant and wide-reaching as possible. Given her academic ability, it was easy to believe it could be very great indeed. I most certainly did not tell her to settle for less than what was within her grasp. Notice that I did not tell Susan to strive for a particular job or specific result. Susan ultimately determined that she was fascinated by policy, and decided to pursue a career in the Canadian government, where she did feel she had the opportunity to stretch and use her talents to their greatest effect. But I could never have pointed her in that specific direction. You see, it is the curse of the economist to see everything in opportunity cost terms. It's never a matter of whether a decision produces positive or negative results. Questions such as did the investment work out? Did the strategy work out? Did the job work out? Was the product saleable? Are inherently flawed. The only question that counts is, have you achieved the best result? Not just a good or acceptable result. Did the investment earn the highest reward open to you? If not, you failed. If you're wondering what this perspective has to do with a skill-first approach, the answer is, everything. Don't misunderstand, skill does matter. It has a place. But it is not the starting place for the best use of talent. Passion is, and passion makes the highest skills possible. Becoming exceptional. I am not such a renegade as to dispute the assertion that more skill is better than less. It is. So, how do you build skill? There are two ways: education, including training, and practice, also called experience. Both take effort, discipline, and persistence. The question is whether that's enough. For an intermediate level of skill, sure. But as competitive pressure rises, the standard of performance also rises, and will keep rising. As a result, every day a divide grows among the skilled. There are those who clearly possess some skill and can get some work done. And then there are the standouts, those who produce exceptional results. A competitive marketplace wants the standouts. These are the stars. Again and again, I have seen this distinction between the merely skilled and the exceptional. It's hard to pin down what the exceptional look like, because while the ordinary come in vanilla, the stars come in many flavors. To begin with, the exceptional tend to have broader domain knowledge. They know more about their subject across a wider range of topics. They have read more extensively, and they have more opinions about their field. I saw this in my student Samuel, who asked a question in every class. His questions were always penetrating, and each one focused on a different aspect of the content. He always had some background information that he was trying to process. There was Melissa, who always asked a provocative question, one that was often a direct challenge to my original observation. She wasn't arrogant, she just had background information in her head that she was trying to integrate. Would you doubt that both of them had serious talent? That they were on their way to being exceptionally skilled? Another characteristic of the exceptional is their mental flexibility, their ability to roam effectively among differing subjects, and differing aspects of the same subject. They're also adept at putting it all in context, at seeing relationships and connections. For instance, after a reference in class to the ancient Roman Empire and modern economic policy, two students came to ask for further elaboration. They were in different programs, neither of which was economics, and one was a recent immigrant from China. Both were well read in ancient Roman history and they were united in this interest. After I provided more information, they began a discussion about ancient Rome, one in labored English. As I left the lecture hall, they were still in intense conversation. Across vastly different cultures and life experiences, they were nevertheless kindred spirits. What they had in common went far beyond their fascination with a society long dead. It was the exceptional talent they recognized in each other. Parker was another such student. Once he came into my office to ask about a specific aspect of the labor market. By the time the conversation had ended, we had discussed in a connected train of thought robotics, computation mathematics, artificial intelligence, demographics, political philosophy, and international debt levels. Do I worry about his employability, about whether he's entering a high-demand field? No, I do not. Exceptional students are all engrossed in anything new and creative. They like new ideas and exhaust me with their comments about why things should be improved, how they could be improved, why they are not already improved, and their own visions of new innovations. Their minds seem to be stuck on fast forward, living more in the future than in the present. If you think that most people are plainly not exceptional like Samuel, Melissa, or the students who were so interested in ancient Rome, think again. If you think that most people aren't capable of having more than commodity skills, think again. For there is one more underlying trait that all stars have in common. In literally thousands of conversations, every student who was exceptional had a passionate interest in the domain being discussed. I have not encountered a single student who had great skill who did not also have passion for the field of battle. Not one. And I say that after teaching 23,000 students. Passion's link to innovative skill is clear. Passion brings an intensity of focus that effort, discipline, and persistence cannot match. Passion provides the drive that causes the mind to cross disciplines and topic boundaries. And I very much hope that my table mate at that retirement dinner reads this, for it's passion that will move her son out of the basement and away from his fast food shifts. Hard questions, honest answers. 1. To what extent are impatience and outside pressures affecting your career choices? 2. What notions do you have about what constitutes a safe job? 3. Do you feel you are not and cannot be exceptional? Why? 4. For parents, are you hoping for a safe career for your child? When was the last? 3. How logic and evidence will find you work you love. I have different versions of the same conversation with students all the time. I explain why skills aren't enough, and why passion is essential. Then we come to the point in the conversation where students say, okay, Professor, I get it. I need to be passionate about my work. I agree with you. Or at least for the sake of the argument I do. But I have absolutely no idea what my passion is. How am I supposed to pursue my passion if I can't find it? Keep in mind, by the way, it's not just the young who say this to me. It's the middle-aged and the old, the highly educated and those less so. This is indeed a perfectly valid question. And I agree. If you don't know what your passion is, you really can't pursue it. Tell me what some of your interests are, I'll ask. Stereotypical as it is, many of the young men I work with will say sports. Great, I'll say. Do you play on a team? No. Do you serve as a coach or manager? No. Bet on outcomes. Occasionally. It quickly becomes apparent to me that their interest is really just in watching their favorite players pursue their passion on television. The answers I get from my female students are only marginally more coherent. Usually they tell me they like to help people, but they don't volunteer, or work with people, or do anything other than perhaps serve customers at restaurants. If it seems like I'm merely reciting stereotypes and cliques, well, you're right. But I report what I see and hear, and this is indeed the way many people think about their destiny. The answer to this most common of questions, how do I pursue my passion if I don't know what it is simple, if not always welcome. You need to work to find your passion. But I have been looking, the student insists when I suggest she could be more proactive. How? I ask. I think about it, she says. Oh? And what does that involve? You know, she says, I think. Now, I don't mean to make fun of this student, who at least is putting some energy into the matter. But her answer to finding her passion seems to be staring into space, waiting for a revelation. This may work for Sherlock Holmes, but probably not so much for the average person in the real world. Or there's the gentleman who tells me that he reads in order to find his passion. So far, so good. And what do you read? I ask. Oh, everything. Putting on my interrogator hat, I press further. Yes, but what? Specifically. It turns out he reads a blog posting here, a social media comment there. Sometimes he even reads big, heavy books, and I congratulate him. But I still tell him he's going about it all wrong, that reading simply what happens to land in front of him is no more sensible than waiting for lightning to strike. Again and again, these searchers are unable to describe how often they search, where they search, and their strategy for searching. At best, their searches are improvised, casual, and effectively just random. There is no sign of focus or persistence, nor any hint of creativity. I want to collect all these people together, look them in the eye, and say, do you really believe you will find your passion in a bar or on MSN's homepage? It all boils down to this: far too many people seem to believe in the advertising tagline of an ancient movie called The Last Starfighter. He did not find his destiny. His destiny found him. So let's get serious. You are looking for your destiny, you are looking for your life's work, you are looking for the arena in which you will do battle. You are looking for your personal pathway to accomplishment, you are looking for the realization of your talent, you are looking for the epitaph on your tombstone. That is what a great career is. Chapter 3 will guide you through how to find it, but if you don't think this will take some focused work, you are sorely mistaken. I'll promise you this, though, it will be worth it. The overwhelm. It feels overwhelming, even impossible to figure it out. In all the conversations with my students, and in all the correspondence I have with people around the world, this is the sentiment most frequently expressed. Let me start with some validation. Yes, it's overwhelming. Finding your passion is not a simple or straightforward process. It's a little like finding your life partner. Sure, some people stumble into their mate by accident and never look back, living happily ever after. But these are the lucky ones. And yes, they do exist. Life, however, is not fair, and not everyone will be lucky. And so relying on pure luck is an invitation to disaster. Most people will have to fight to find their way. They'll have to earn it in a way the lucky will never fully appreciate. Indeed, for most, the path is filled with twists and turns. It's hard. But so what? Again, the important point is that it's worth it. What's more, there are two very legitimate reasons why it's so overwhelming. The first is that, just as with choosing a partner, when choosing a passion to pursue, you need to listen to your emotions and also to be logical at the same time, but not too much of one or the other. The second reason is the sheer number of possibilities available. Let's break the first reason down. On the one hand, the emotional side of you must care deeply about the work. You need to honor that part of yourself and not dismiss your love for, say, surfing, just because your rational brain is running through the improbability of ever finding a job riding waves at the beach. On the other hand, if there's too much emotion involved, you're in trouble because you are not thinking clearly. You can go through an entire range of emotions about work you think you love, like nursing, and get so captivated by the romance of it all by the image of yourself as Florence Nightingale, for instance, that you walk right past your passion. The same emotional thinking is present and dangerous when it concerns a career that you're certain you don't want. The emotional seeker will say things like, "Oh, I could never be a realtor. That doesn't appeal to me at all. I could never do it." "All right," I'll say in return. "Why is that? Do you know how a realtor spends most of his day? Do you know the skills needed to be a good realtor? What their backgrounds tend to be, and why?" The emotional seeker does not know the answers to these questions. The emotional seeker has a vague sense of the realtor as someone who drives people around and looks at houses. He hasn't stopped to consider the negotiating savvy, the people skills, the understanding of a complex market, and the creativity to grasp the potential in a house that just needs some cosmetic help. "But Professor," the emotional seeker says, "you're always telling us to be passionate. If I don't feel that spark when I think about being a realtor, shouldn't I listen to that feeling?" Here is where I roll my eyes. This is not Romeo and Juliet, where eyes meet and the world stops. Passion is not instant fireworks. And when the emotional seeker is talking to me about a spark, I can't help but think he's using emotion as an excuse not to do the work of gathering the necessary information. So let me say it plainly, get the facts. Know what you're pursuing, and then if you still don't think it's for you, fine. But at least you're working with all the available data. Just as emotional seekers are liable to walk right past their passion, they're also vulnerable to being so committed to their passion that they ignore all the warning signs that it's a bad fit. Who doesn't know someone who's in a dysfunctional relationship, but willfully, stubbornly refuses to see it? "But I love him," your friend might wail, as you list all the ways her partner has betrayed her. At the other extreme, we have the ruthlessly rational logical seeker. The logical seeker will get so caught up in amassing facts and observations that she forgets the goal is to become energized by her mission. "Look at this spreadsheet," she might say, with something akin to passion. "Clearly, given my qualifications and the areas in which I've excelled so far, the marketability of this subset of skills, the promotion rates, and the rates of return to educational designations, I should be a software engineer. But do you love it?" I ask. "Do you think you would do it even if you won the lottery and didn't have to work?" The logical seeker is likely to engage in an argument with me about the improbability of winning the lottery, which of course isn't the point at all. The point is, would she choose to be a software engineer even if she didn't need a salary? What's the answer, then? Hard as it is, you must utilize both emotion and logic in balance. Use emotion to drive your search and logic to make your choice. Fact and emotion power each other, neither is subservient to the other. I had two students who were passionately interested in political affairs and public policy. Both wanted to have impact on their world. One decided that he would seek political office as soon as possible. He created an overall plan that started with an immediate run for municipal government and ended at the highest office in the land. He focused all his research solely on the mechanics of winning elections. However, his plan was wildly unrealistic, given that it had a 30-year time horizon and assumed conditions that were unknowable. It was all emotion and little logic. The other student had an equally strong concern for public welfare and policy. But his reading of recent history led him to believe that political action was futile. It's just uninformed politicians responding to apathetic and ignorant voters, he complained to me. He became very discouraged and sought refuge in cynical inaction. Both of these young people had let themselves yield to emotion, and each had arrived at a different but equivalently unhelpful conclusion. Both needed a cold shower of logic and evidence. The first had to understand that he was living in fantasy land, the cynic needed to understand that he was part of the problem. I finally persuaded both of them to do their homework, to read widely, and to look for practical ways to satisfy their political passion. The first student is now preparing to become a political strategist, working in the backroom where, arguably, most of the power is. The second is working on data analysis in order to increase voter turnout. Now they are both pursuing their passion and have the chance to make useful contributions sooner rather than later. Now back to the second reason why finding your passion feels so overwhelming, the vast number of possibilities. I teach economics, and so I'm more captivated by numbers and probabilities than the average person. I'm a self-professed numbers junkie, actually. As such, I see the challenge of finding passion through a scientific lens. How many careers are there? There are hundreds or thousands, depending on how you define them. The total number of occupations is at a record high. For every occupation that has disappeared, like typewriter repair person, many new ones have emerged, like web designer and computer animator. How many topics of knowledge exist in which you might have an interest? Tens of thousands. In fact, there are more than you could ever learn about. Our minds instinctively pull away from such limitless vistas. So again, when people tell me they feel overwhelmed, I agree that they have a justifiable reason to feel that way. But then they must stop feeling sorry for themselves and become what I think of as a thoughtful tourist. Like the tourist exploring a new city, you have a world of ideas and careers to explore. Like the tourist, you must also recognize that you can't explore all that is on offer. Like the tourist, you must plan your approach. But most of all, you must take as much time as you need to reach your final career destination. Accept that your journey may be long. Sure, limitless choices are overwhelming, but that's a good thing. Wouldn't you prefer too many choices to too few? When there is a brick wall keeping you out of the city of your dreams, yes, you're probably stuck. But if there is a lush, complex forest obstructing your path, all you really need is a good map and a solid strategy to navigate your way through. Step 1. Start where you are. I do not know where to start, the young person said. Start where you are. Where else would you start? I inevitably reply. You can hardly start where you are not. Where would I go? Where you are not. This dialogue, which would do credit to Yoda and Luke Skywalker, speaks to the casualness with which many conduct their so-called career explorations. So, begin by making an inventory of what you presently know about careers and your interests. It might not be a single-spaced, two-page list at first, but even jotting down a few items is a start. Start with writing down how you spend your free time. What types of books do you gravitate toward? What sort of conversations with your friends do you most enjoy? What types of projects do you embark on by choice? Most people can define a few interests, and many of those do go beyond sports and helping people. But they insist that their interests are unrelated to career. Gerald, for instance, loved crossword puzzles, but it took me a good half-hour of questioning to get that out of him. Why didn't you mention that before? I asked. Who cares? Isn't it irrelevant? He replied. But since he obviously cared, it was relevant. Gerald was committing a devastating mistake, one that would greatly limit his chance to find any true passion. He was in my office to talk about his career, and he was subconsciously eliminating any interest that seemingly was not, on its surface, career-oriented. Don't you see? I asked. Being a crossword fanatic is absolutely relevant to career. Gerald looked puzzled. Professor, are you suggesting I become a crossword puzzle maker? Because I don't think there are a lot of openings for those. His sarcasm was barely suppressed. So what did his interest in crossword puzzles suggest? In addition to writing puzzles, it suggested such careers as cryptographer. In the popular film The Imitation Game, based on the life of Alan Turing, Turing screened would-be cryptographers by assessing their facility with crossword puzzles. But Gerald could do much more. He could be a computer security specialist, archaeologist, criminal investigator, linguist, game designer, toy designer, criminal litigator, auditor, and so many others, many of which I listed for him. I never thought about it, he said. While Gerald was interested in crosswords, Jody was interested in writing. But, like so many other sheep, she took a look at her English major at the end of college and just assumed she would apply to law school. Fortunately, and here is where Jody became lucky, when an advisor reviewed her essays for law school admission, the advisor said, "All of your essays are about how much you love to write. Shouldn't you perhaps look at a career in writing?" Jody listened, without dismissing writing as an irrelevant possibility. She considered not only where she was, but where she had been. She recalled how she had asked for a typewriter for her 6th birthday, so that she could write a novel. She had written a children's book the next year, and a chapter book for her 4th grade teacher. She had filled journals and journals with ideas and words. By mining her past and examining her present, by taking stock of where she was and where she had been, the path before her became clear. She's not a novelist, but she does work in publishing, and she writes almost each and every day. But what if she hadn't encountered that advisor? What if she hadn't taken stock? She would have likely become like Jeff, a 30-year-old who went straight to law school after undergrad because he didn't know what else to do. He didn't enjoy law school, but he'd started, so he figured he might as well stick it out. Now he works as a lawyer and does not enjoy his job at all. But the income is good, and he's 30 and feels he's at a point in life where he can't go backward and make less. He feels stuck. It's not that Jeff's is a tragic story. He's only 30, after all. He has plenty of time. But he must assess where he is, he must mine his history, he must look for the threads that have connected his interests, and he must not just rely on what the herds are doing. There's also a completely different way of taking stock. Jody realized her thread was writing. Jeff hadn't stopped to look at his thread, and then there's David. David considered his thread a weakness. And, truth be told, he wasn't wrong. He was actually a poster boy for laziness. He worked just enough to get the right number of credits to graduate. He actively looked for a low-stress, low-workload workplace where the salary was adequate. This gave him the personal time to do whatever he wanted, not that he did much. He saw his primary contribution to the planet as being a good parent. And he was indeed a very good parent. So what's the problem, you ask? Nothing at all, except that he wasn't happy. He was bored. In our discussions, it came as a revelation to him that his laziness could be harnessed to a great purpose. All he needed to do was find a critically important problem, and figure out how a lazy person would complete it. Being lazy, we discussed, was just another way, albeit a perverse one, to express a desire for efficiency. I challenged him to mobilize what some would see as a weakness into a force for positive change. Half a year later, he had taken 2 separate jobs at his company bookkeeper, an office manager, and turned them into one by eliminating redundant and unnecessary steps. There was a significant cost saving, and his employer is happy. David is not bored. And oddly enough, he is working with commitment toward becoming an efficiency expert. As is often the case, passion is attached to a kind of work rather than a specific occupation. David used where he was and where he had been, to focus on where he might go. Step 2, stop. Once you've identified one or more existing interests or threads of your life, what do you do next? Stop, just in case you're going to do something dumb. Some people are so desperate to find their great passion that they leap into the trap of trying out a career in their newly found interest. If Gerald had left our conversation about crosswords to enroll in a cryptology program, I would have been nothing short of exasperated with him. Rather, the value in identifying the crossword interest is that it suggested a broad direction in which to continue his search. Given the number of possibilities, that's a very great value. But it was not a green light to jump off a cliff and become the next Alan Turing. People repeatedly tell me they tried this, they tried that, they retried some other choices. They made sure they gave their new job or new school program time to grow on them. This crazed version of gardening, tossing seeds everywhere in hopes one might sprout into a beautiful flower, does nothing more than chew up many years of your scarce lifetime. This is why there are too many in their late 30s or early 40s with a dozen careers behind them, and still they search. Of course, their Desperation has only deepened, and now they range into even more speculative choices as they seek their God-given right to a passion. They are identical to the losing gambler, who makes ever greater bets to restore his fortunes. All in all, these disorganized, random walkers give passion a bad name. Take Bethany. Bethany was a change junkie. She liked variety and followed her impulses. One year she was committed to music and worked for a record label. The next year she was a Hollywood nanny. Then she moved to the corporate world, working in advertising, until the next great calling summoned her. One day she discovered to her horror that many of her friends were far ahead of her in terms of both career and life. It's not supposed to be this way, she thought. She was at least their equal, and the status quo looked unfair to her. Bethany was stirred to take action, which, ironically, meant to stop. Instead of jumping from one thing to the next, she committed to staying in one place. It took a lot of effort on her part, as she learned that sustained effort was not boring. Instead of acting like that crazed gardener, she took the approach of thinking her options through and researching. It was most certainly not easy. She told me her head was aching and that she had to stop herself from trying yet another fresh approach. Fortunately, she persisted with one relapse, and carried her work, this time as a concert impresario, through to a successful conclusion. And that is exactly what she needed. A reward for patience. Recommending patience is never as effective as enjoying the benefit of the harvest that comes at the end of a long growing season. Does that sound too academic? Is it academic to know what you are doing? Is it academic to be informed about one of the most important decisions of your life? Then yes, this is academic. And free-spirited change junkie Bethany is glad she took this approach, because now, with sustained effort, she has made serious progress in finding her passion. For most people, stopping is as simple as, well, stopping. If you are frustrated that you are not making more progress with your interior design career, and you find yourself feeling drawn in by something like real estate, just stop. Have you done everything you can with interior design? Have you tried different paths for making that career successful? Have you talked to enough people and researched enough options within interior design? Think it through and hang out for a while. Step 3, the great sampling. And now, let me change from strategic guru to tactician. Because I don't believe it's fair to stand up on a pedestal and just say find your dreams, follow the rainbow, get everyone enthusiastic, and then take my leave. No. I want to leave you with some real tools for going forward. Economists, it just so happens, have a remarkable set of tools at the ready. Instead of following random impulses, economists take samples across a wide field. As any mathematician knows, sampling is the only way to get command of a vast domain of possibilities. You recognize, morbid though it is, that you will die before you could possibly learn about all the topics in which you might be interested. So you either A. roll the dice, B. give up, or C. go the way of the economist and conduct an organized sample. It's up to you, of course, but I'd recommend option C. Here's how to begin. Starting with your existing interests, you move outward in a spiral-like fashion to probe for more interests. How? It's terribly complicated, so get your notebook ready. You read, you talk, and you think analytically. Did you get all that? Read. Read, but don't just read whatever happens to come across your path, like the young man I mentioned a few pages earlier. Use the pathway I mention above as your guide, and read many different subjects from many different sources. Read trade books, textbooks, fiction, non-fiction, articles, magazines, blogs, posters, museum and gallery displays, newspapers, news aggregators, conference papers, advertorials, and so on. Let's say, for instance, that the interest you've identified and that you think might just be a passion is food. Read Bon Appetit, subscribe to food blogs, read Anthony Bourdain's memoirs, read Like Water for Chocolate. Done. Great. Now, push yourself out of the center of your spiral. Are you interested in the creativity that cooking offers? Read about molecular gastronomy. Not sure what this is? Exactly. So read and find out how cooking is being made weirdly scientific. Might you be interested in the business aspects of food? Read restaurant and food trade journals. Or perhaps you're interested in what food represents to us historically. Read books like Salt, A World History in Lesser Beasts, A Snout-to-Tail History of the Humble Pig. The goal of this reading is to notice whether you are getting more and more interested, or if you are starting to feel satiated. If your reaction is the latter, food is probably not your passion. Let me give you another example. Fred got caught up in a news article about the geology of a new mining discovery. He was fascinated by the fact that a massive mineral deposit was the result of a meteor strike eons ago. So what? You might ask, does this have to do with a career? A lot, as it turns out. Fred now runs a geologically oriented tourist attraction. Now, here's where my advice might surprise you. If a subject seems interesting in the sense that you want to read more, do not do so. The present goal is to sample, not to read in depth. Each subject or topic you choose to read about should be farther away from the previous one. You find treasure by searching both far afield and nearby. Each item you read appears either more interesting than the others or less interesting. You are probing, exploring, gauging your degree of interest in the objective. So, while you might have found that reading about astronomy was getting more interesting, you then realized that astrophysics was even more interesting. Indeed, astronomy might have qualified as a passion, but you find out that your greater love is astrophysics. By reading broadly, by stopping yourself from reading more astronomy, you were not misled into thinking it is your destiny. By maximizing the range of your reading, you increase the probability that you will find more interests, perhaps more passions, and finally, you'll find that one of them will be your overriding passion. Do not under any circumstances mimic the actions of a search engine, which says, if you're interested in this, then you might be interested in this. 2. As everyone knows, someone who searches for a toy online will then receive ads for every child-related product out there. These engines essentially freeze your interests and make it easier to sell to you, until you are so bored that you shut off your computer and go for a walk. In the great sampling, you are trying to find something, not sell yourself something. If you stick to familiar ground, reading and exploring only connected areas, you are really selling yourself the illusion of thoughtful action. Again and again I have been told how a book, a news feature, or a single article in a magazine changed the trajectory of someone's life. One person I spoke with read a story written by a pilot about the pleasure of flight. To his credit, he kept reading and exploring different avenues, but always his mind returned to the joy of flying. Now he knew he had a basis for comparison. Flying appealed to him more than the many other endeavors he had considered. So he could and did proceed to become a pilot with confidence. Someone else I know was scanning the business press and happened to see an article on bankruptcy proceedings. It struck him as interesting and, with more reading and conversation, fascinating. Who could possibly find it interesting to pick over the bones of a dead business, you might ask? He learned how salvaging assets could save some jobs and lives. He learned how bankruptcy gave an entrepreneur a second chance and simultaneously served as a vital link in the flow of credit. That's what motivated him. Do you think he was lucky he found that article? Perhaps. Or perhaps the fact that he read widely and voraciously for almost 2 years is the actual reason. He had started by reading about general business issues, finding that business topics in general interested him. But that was a very broad field, so he read about business processes, accounting as a business management tool, and the regulations affecting business. The last of these led him to bankruptcy. He had found his home. Talk. Similarly, you want to talk to people with widely ranging interests, experiences, and backgrounds. I speak from strong experience here. The only reason I presume to be able to offer guidance is because my students have taught me more than I have ever taught them. They've taught me about the amazingly diverse accomplishments of humanity, They've taught me what works and what doesn't. No matter if you are usually the teacher. Always be a student, and it's amazing what you'll learn. If you do not happen to have a ready supply of undergraduates cycling through your office as I do, you might wonder how to find these individuals. In the first place, not a problem. Simply look. Look at your school, workplace, community center, country fair, exhibition, public meeting, or any community of interest, virtual or real. Is it easy to approach near strangers? No, sometimes people are jerks, but so what? Just look further. And with renewed determination. And I would bet serious money that most people will be flattered that someone's taken an interest in their career. Stories. People love to talk about themselves. As with reading, don't only look close to home, but don't neglect looking close to home, either. Talk to your family and friends. They are, at the very least, accessible to you. I do talk to my family and friends, I hear quite frequently. But they don't know any more than I do. Their experience is outdated, the student will say. I want to look at my future here, not someone else's past. Apologies from a humble Canadian, but those excuses are absurd. If your family and friends are older than you, or if they have different experience than you, then they know more than you about that. Next excuse, please. This entire book is based directly on the past experiences of a very large number of people, some from many years ago. And that is exactly the point. The same strategy for identifying your passion has worked for a long time. And it is likely to work for a long time to come. Again and again, I have been told how a single conversation opened a floodgate of career possibilities. Again and again, I have been told how a single conversation changed someone's life. Perhaps the problem arises not from the failure to talk with family or friends, but from how those conversations go. A productive conversation does not involve you complaining about the frustrations of your search, the luck of other people, or just general whining. And a productive conversation does not involve asking vague questions like, "What do you think I should do?" Instead, ask about the other person, ask about her interests, and ask how she discovered her passion. It works, I promise. A young man named Ben was sorely deflated in his search for passion. And then he met someone who loved his work intensely. In Ben's short life, that was a first. He'd never encountered anyone in love with their job. Everyone else Ben knew, his family and his friends, saw a job only as a way to make money. It was what you did if you did not win a lottery. But if you had to work, the ultimate goal was to secure a job that paid a lot so you could retire as soon as possible. So it was for Ben's parents, and so it had been for his grandparents. But one day Ben met a friend of his father's, a cabinet maker. Ben made the mistake of asking whether the work was hard. The cabinet maker clearly thought it was a poor question and delivered an almost rant about the glories of cabinetry. He stroked the finish of a nearby table and made Ben do likewise. It was not, he thundered, about hard work, but whether your work fed the soul. Ben was taken aback. He had never even considered looking for his passion, but talking to the cabinet maker made him change his mind. Ben actually wasn't himself interested in cabinetry, but he wanted the same gleam in his eye that this gentleman had. Ben set to work finding his passion. He wanted to imagine that he could one day himself berate someone for asking, "Is that work hard?" Or there was Tammy, who met a funeral director who showed her how a dignified exit from life was both reaffirming and an important release point for grief. She was in nursing school and couldn't stop replaying their conversation. She wasn't interested in being a funeral director, but then again, she'd never understood the promise or depth of the job before. It made her expand her approach to nursing, and she gravitated toward hospice/end-of-life care, where she saw the impact she could have on a family's impending loss and perhaps help make it more meaningful. If you are horribly shy, if the thought of talking to strangers terrifies you, the first thing I'm compelled to tell you is that you must overcome your shyness if you are to succeed. The second thing is that, in the absence of people to talk to, you must read about how other people have found their way. You don't have to have political aspirations to find value in David McAuliffe's biography Truman, for instance, or Be Religious to Gain insight from the memoirs of Mother Teresa. Read about how other people found their way forward. Profit from the examples of others who changed the world. Think analytically. You cannot just read or talk. You must also have your mind in high gear. You must be fully engaged, reading and thinking to a purpose. You must be constantly saying to yourself about whatever book, fact, argument, or person is at hand, why? Why did they do this? Why did they not do that? What if they had done this? What if they had done something entirely different? Why don't they do something differently now? If answers start coming quickly, your passion may be lurking nearby. But you must get those questions in the front of your mind. Yes, it is intense. Few people are practiced in the art of critical thinking, regardless of their educational background. But you will never find your passion simply by surfing or browsing the internet. Recognize the superficiality implied by those words surfing and browsing and by our impatient, thoughtless world. You will have to stand against the tide of popular culture to find your passion, and that is not a simple task. Alex, for instance, was the privileged heir of a rich family whose wealth had been created over several generations in the resource extraction business. His family knew they would have to make big changes in the future. They hoped the next generation would lead the charge into the 21st century. But Alex's family was smart enough to let him find his own way forward, supporting his career goals as long as he was thoughtful and applied his talent. Still, they did hint that they would like him to apply himself to the family business. The problem for Alex was that the weight of the wealth he would command was intimidating. He wanted to use it effectively but felt torn between his family's interests and his own. In a perverse way, his supportive family made it worse. If they had pushed him in one direction, he would have pushed back and done the opposite. Now he had to decide for himself. In this case, as in so many others, our discussion involved the many alternatives and how to rank them. It was in fact a discussion about strategic mastery. When he saw it that way, and saw himself as an orchestrator, his first steps were decisive. He would join the family business, but he was clear that he wanted to work for someone else. First, to learn skills that would be complementary to what he would be doing with the family business, and to gain experience from the employees' point of view. He set goals and timelines and informed his family of his intentions. The bottom line is, thinking analytically works, even for the rich. The great sampling is the MVP of my toolbox. But many people will want more tools. They will want tests, courses, checklists, or other techniques that will help them identify their interests. Plenty of these tools exist. Some are clearly credible, with research to back them up. Others are not. Many of these tools can be very helpful, but they should be taken as merely a step in the research, not as a shortcut. Do not, I repeat, do not take results that gently point you toward a career in finance and then immediately enroll in an accounting course. This is the equivalent of taking diet pills. It might make you feel like you've got a handle on it, but it is not a lasting solution in the end. You have to do the hard work of reading, talking, and thinking analytically. You have to do the important work of the great sampling. So look at additional tools as just that, aids to help you do the hard work. They can increase the number of starting points for your continued exploration. They can reduce the danger that you'll miss considering a potentially fruitful line of inquiry. So by all means, check a few out if you'd like. Just make sure they're backed by research. And always remember that no tool can tell you what your interests are. A tool can only tell you what your interests might be. Finding your true passion is too important to trust to an automated calculation, and there is no substitute for your own hard work and research. Step 4. Recognize your passion versus an interest. Imagine a man wants to propose to his girlfriend of several years. He takes her to a beautiful bluff overlooking the ocean. They have a picnic, drink some champagne, and then when she stands up to wipe some crumbs off her shirt, he gets down on one knee. "Darling," he says, These past years with you have been fairly conflict-free. I think we are very compatible. I find you very interesting. I think we should spend our life together, if you will agree to marry me. Oh, this poor man. If he is lucky enough not to be shoved off the bluff by his girlfriend, he will at the very least be dumped by her. That would probably be a smart move, for he clearly does not love her passionately. He is merely interested in her. The rule of passion is simple: the mind cannot stop thinking about that which it loves. One moment you are reading in hopes of finding a topic of great interest, the next you find you are reading and do not want to stop. It almost feels that you cannot stop. Or you find yourself in a regular conversation, and you start talking with excitement about an idea or possibility. Or you find yourself in an activity and you lose track of time itself. You're in your flow, or genius zone, as various writers have called it. For some, the realization is sudden. But it's not magic. It's based on reaching a critical mass of experience, so that realization bubbles up and coalesces into a complete and compelling vision. Leave it to an economist to take all the magic out of a revelation, right? For others, it is a slow process, each piece coming into view separately until the pattern is revealed. If you're stuck wondering if your interest is a passion, you can think about the proposal story. That is, if your interest were a person, how would you propose? You can also look carefully at the problems surrounding your interest. Are you fascinated by them? For example, I'm interested in biology. The complexities and interactions of biological systems seem amazing to me. But I have zero interest in solving biological mysteries. It's not just that I do not know enough to do so, the truth is, I do not want to learn enough to do so. And that leads us to another indicator of passion, the teacher's rule. Teachers know that the best students learn easily because they love the subject. Easily does not mean quickly, easily does not mean without frustration and errors. What it means is that these students are driven to find answers, to overcome whatever obstacle appears. They learn their subjects because they have to. But if there is no passion for learning, there is no passion of any kind. So, test yourself. Once you have found a candidate for your passion, find an introductory textbook and find out if you want to teach yourself something. Yes, I suppose this is what you would expect a professor to suggest. But that doesn't make it less true. Step 5. Keep looking. Now that you have identified a passion, don't start worrying about whether it is or could be a career. That question is premature. As soon as an interest qualifies or appears to qualify as a passion, put it aside and keep looking for another passion. At this point, you probably think I'm being unreasonable. But just because you have found your love, it does not mean you have found your greatest love. For want of patience, you might walk past your destiny. So, keep searching and tilt the odds even more in your favor. Just as the gentleman who was captivated by the pilot's article about flying came back to it, you will return to your true passion, as well. And you'll be all the more assured that it's the right career. Remember Jody, the would-be lawyer, who became a writer. After she identified her passion, she took some detours. When jobs in publishing were not available in abundance, she tried public health and experimented with social work. And still she came back to writing, even more convinced that, although the road to do what she loved might be challenging, it was what she loved most of all. Too many passions. Professor, I feel like I'd be just as happy being the next Einstein as the next Beethoven. The young man was clearly fretting. Excellent, I replied. Having multiple passions is wonderful, not a disadvantage to be anxious about. Yet this young man is not alone in thinking it's a predicament. I would say that the only reason it's perceived as a problem is because we live in an unimaginative, linear world. We live in a world that asks you to check off a single box for what you do. What if, instead of checking off a box, you got to write a full paragraph explaining your work? This isn't what the world asks you to do, but it's what you should do. Those who are fortunate enough to have many passions should try to combine as many of them as possible into an Integrated career. For example, I've known engineers who work in the entertainment industry, using their engineering expertise in unusual ways. As I discussed in the introduction, I am another example. I teach, yes, but I'm also an economist. Economics is another one of my loves. I'm passionate about technology, and I advise students about their technological ventures. I've forged my own path that allows me to integrate what I love the most into my work, and though it has taken effort and has required creativity, I've not done anything that anyone else could not do. If you can escape the limited constraints of conventionality, and the key there is not feeling you must tick off any one box, then you can combine several passions to create the career you want. I will go much farther into this in Chapter 12. Then there is the individual who has difficulty figuring out which of her passions should be the basis of her livelihood, and which should remain her personal pleasure. For instance, a middle-aged attorney spent each and every one of her weekends skiing in the winter. From the moment the weather turned cold in November, she checked ski reports obsessively for signs of fresh powder. Did this mean she shouldn't be an attorney? That she was truly meant to be on ski patrol instead? Not at all. The question at hand here is whether she lived for the weekends or enjoyed her job. In this case, she loved her job, and skiing fit into her life perfectly. She was a multifaceted person, living a well-rounded life, and there's nothing I could recommend more. How much time? I'm interested in anything for a while, wrote Summer. Even obsessive about things for a while. And then I get bored. Maybe my personality type isn't career passion capable. Maybe you are lecturing to the lifeless masses about what only a tiny proportion is actually capable of sustaining. My passion isn't very concrete, wrote Barbara. I have often felt excitement when I start creating things or figuring things out in different areas. My ideas of what I'd do lie in these vague feelings of creating and learning. I thought if I tried hard enough to incorporate creativity and learning, I would fall in love with any job in my way, but I don't. Now I'm left searching for what I'm meant to do, and I have to overcome all these external and internal voices telling me to stop and settle. I've heard concerns like these many times over, and others as well. How long should the search for interests continue? When do you stop? When you have enough passions to choose your greatest love? Do you stop searching if all you can find are interests and no real passions? When do you settle for a career based only on interest? All these are valid questions. And I do have answers, but first it's important to recognize the mind's natural tendency to resolve painful uncertainty by rushing to judgment, even to the judgment that it's time to give up. Be aware of your own bias, and recognize how your brain might be working against you and your capacity for patience. I do not believe that any personality type is incapable of finding a sustaining passion. The 23,000 students I've worked with over 30 years are proof that, contrary to Summer's suggestion that I'm lecturing to lifeless masses, the majority of people, not a tiny proportion, are capable of finding their passion. Quite simply, I've seen it. My guess is that Summer is surrounded by people who seem worn down by their work. So it seems to her that you have to be remarkably exceptional, blessed by the gods, to enjoy your work. But I know that's not so. I know because I have watched a small army of people find their passions. Some found it in esoteric fields, others in working with their hands, some in the most rigorous domains, others in highly artistic endeavors, some in solitary labors, and others in massive teams. They came from all backgrounds, immigrants and native-born, the affluent and those who could barely pay their rent. All personality types were represented. Some were shy and others loud, some were aggressively confident and others fearful. The only thing that united them was their passion. It is not exceptional for people to find their passions, it is not reserved for the select few. But I will say that the vast majority of them searched methodically and with determination to reach their goals. In one sense, yes, there is a limit to how long you should search and how extensive your great sampling should be. While it will always be a judgment call, there are some benchmarks to guide you. First, the decision is affected by your age. If you're young, you have the luxury of a longer search, perhaps of several years. If you're older, you need to stop sooner, but you should take at least a year. Does this mean you're devoting all your waking hours to this? Not at all. That's why a key determinant is not the length but the intensity of the search. If you attend school or have a job, you might spend a couple hours searching on most days. At that rate of intensity, a well-rounded search over a year should cover a lot of territory and have a high likelihood of success. 2 years at that intensity is even better. Just so you don't think I'm nothing but an out-of-touch taskmaster, clearly not everyone will be able to spend a couple of hours a day. For example, the parent of young children will likely move more slowly. You'll know you've been successful in your great sampling if this time yields at least a couple of strong interests or passions. The question of how long you should search, however, is misleading in and of itself. It is merely tactical rather than strategic. If you're young, search as long as you can before the demands of life require you to take a job of some kind. But taking a job doesn't mean you stop searching. It just means you search intermittently. Life pathways are highly varied. Any number of circumstances can set us off on roundabout journeys. Becoming ill or aiding an ill family member can deflect our time and attention. Finding the love of your life can be so overpowering that career fades out of view for a time. The incidental accidents of life can therefore displace the search for interests and career passion. It is understandable that someone might find himself married and working for a living, without either an identified interest or passion. But that is no reason to give up finding one. In these circumstances, you cannot search aggressively or continuously. But you can search nevertheless. Whenever you can, however you can. Alec was a well-paid machinist who was seriously bored. Every night he complained to his spouse about the monotony of his job. Finally, she told him to either stop the whining or do something about his discontent. Bless the spouse who knows when to be supportive and when to raise a ruckus. So Alec took a night course in literature and surprised himself by doing well. 6 years later, he's far from where he started. He teaches senior English at a private high school. And he couldn't be happier. Flora was a high school dropout who went from one thankless job to another, a single parent who struggled to pay her bills by working as an administrative assistant. But she was a fighter, a quiet, steady woman who thought she deserved better. She experimented, read, and talked to friends and family about how they'd found their paths. Finally, there it was, a job worthy of her talent and interests, a near-perfect blend of her interests, personality, and aptitude. Finally, she is happy as a veterinary technician, working with animals she loves all day and using her experience and people skills to excel. A better role model for her child would be hard to find. So how long do you search? In pursuit of your passion, you search as long as you have to. As long as you search, you have at least the hope that tomorrow your talent will find its true home. What's more, once you've found it and achieved it, be open to changing. You change, and the world changes. Priorities shift, new opportunities and crises can arise. While you must pursue your passion to realize your talent, there is an equal need to be ever vigilant. In other words, if you're doing it right, the search should never end. Hard questions, honest answers. 1. Take an inventory of your interests over your lifetime. What patterns do you see? 2. To what extent is emotion driving your career choices? To what extent is logic? Is there a 4. The most common career mistakes. The first rule of investment is, don't lose money. Similarly, the first rule of career is, stop making mistakes. So we are going to look at the 7 most common mistakes people make after they find their passion. Most of those who provide career advice try to strike an encouraging tone, and they are often reluctant to spend much time talking about what goes wrong. While I too want to offer an upbeat message, I want to show you how to have a great career, not just merely encourage you to do so. That's why Chapter 4 looks at mistakes cold-bloodedly. You need to see what not to do. Yes, there are a lot of proactive steps you must take for a great career, but first you have to get out of your own way. Mistake number 1, has your passion crossed over to dangerous obsession? To be sure, passion is about emotion, as it should be. Emotion, by its very definition, moves people to action. But emotion is all too often the enemy of thought. Consider Jason, who is a passionate gamer. He discovered computer games as a young man and was mesmerized, as are many young people. But Jason had a true passion. He wasn't merely addicted to the game's rush. He was fascinated by every aspect of the computer game, its technology, story lines, history, creative aspects, and commercial potential. He then crafted a career plan to become an important part of this industry. He got an education that allowed him to secure a job as a technical developer at a credible company. The problem was, the more he immersed himself, the more everything else was pushed out of his mind. Gaming became his entire world. His circle of friends shrank to those he played with who were equally enthralled. These passionate players talked themselves into a state of near obsession. Ask Jason about anything outside of gaming and you got a blank stare. If the subject of conversation was, say, movies, all he could talk about was which game would make a good movie. Naturally, he grew more isolated. Then his career took a turn for the worse. Jason was already aware that his technical role had not grown to allow him creative input, or any kind of input at all. He just coded, as he was told to. If he made a suggestion to his higher UPS, it went nowhere, not surprisingly, since they didn't want to engage in extended conversations with him. Even among other employees, he was known as being over the top in his zeal for gaming and nothing else. Who knew whether his ideas were any good or not? They were never tested. His discontent about that became irrelevant when he was finally let go. Sales were weak in the hyper-competitive games market, and Jason was downsized. He was one of the first to be terminated, since his value was simply coding an easy role to replace if sales rose again. Since Jason's passion was so strong and genuine, he was completely confused. Wasn't passion the key thing you needed to succeed in your career? Hadn't he done everything right? You might suppose he'd learned. He wasn't doing everything right. But when we spoke, he could not break out of talking about how much he loved his work and the industry. Why couldn't everyone else just see how cool his ideas were? I would like to say I helped him. I did not. Jason was not prepared to accept that he was making any kind of mistake. And so he believed he just had to keep trying. These days, Jason still labors in the lower echelons of gaming companies, moving from one entry-level position to another, hoping that the next job will be the one. But if I couldn't help Jason, maybe Jason's example can help you. Jason let his passion rule his mind. He forgot to think, to create a plan, or to find his distinction. Passion is without a doubt a powerful motivator, but like a powerful dragon, much beloved of gamers, it needs to be reined in. Reined in, your passion can take flight into great adventures. Otherwise, your dragon might just incinerate you. Mistake number 2, are you using passion itself as an excuse? Martha's passion took her in a different direction. An intensely curious person, she was also, as she told me, a naturally passionate person. She cared a lot, and cared about a lot of things. Martha was also very smart, well-read, and had had an excellent education. As a result, she could speak articulately about her many passions, telling you exactly why they were so important to her and to society. These arguments were almost always very persuasive. In addition, she had multiple skills that offered her a variety of employment opportunities. What could go wrong? Unfortunately, like Jason, Martha had no sense of mental discipline. She started a job in a burst of passionate enthusiasm, and typically impressed her employer, but only for a few months. Then her reading and interests suddenly found a new passion in a new direction that she began to think about almost constantly. She became so distracted that her daily work performance declined. As that happened, she became dissatisfied with her current job and concluded that her original passion for it was not as strong as she had thought. But that was okay since she had a better passion, and off she went to get another job. And with her skills, she got it. But then the same thing happened as yet another passion replaced the second one. And again. After that. Of course, her job history began to look questionable. Martha was confused. How could a person like her, with so many true passions, have a career that was circling the junkyard? Remember that a great career requires having impact, I told her. And to have impact in any of your passions, you must persist in one of them at a time. Professor, are you asking me to turn my back on my passion? She asked, and smiled a wide gotcha smile. She thought she'd caught me in a contradiction. No such luck for Martha. For while passion is essential for a great career, it is not sufficient. My student Elliot made a similar mistake. Firm in his belief that he could rely solely on his passion to carry the day, he planned to follow his passion and pursue his dreams. That was the most important consideration. Everything else was just a minor detail, and thus his passion became his protector. He loved green buildings and their design. He recruited a partner and decided to start constructing green buildings. He listened to analytic questioners like myself patiently, deflecting every practical issue with positively fantastical solutions. Apparently, the government would provide help with funding. Apparently, he'd be able to rush through the standard periods of safety testing. Now, Elliot was a smart and knowledgeable person. He was not delusional. But he was totally in love with his idea and blind to any objections. When his scheme came to an end, he took it badly. What Elliot and Martha learned the hard way is that passion is not a justification for disengaging your brain. If you're looking for a simple answer that's easy to implement, passion is all I need, you're not looking for an answer that actually works. But if you're looking for a true answer that is multifaceted and works, keep reading. Mistake number 3, are you neglecting your homework? The most common mistake afflicting those who have a disciplined passion is their utter failure to do their homework. While they may have a defined passion they are committed to pursuing, many people, like Jason, Martha, and Elliot, still think of passion as a shield, as though it will protect them from bad decisions. So these foolhardy souls plunge ahead without a realistic plan. Harry's passion had intensified and defined itself. He began with a broad interest in science, which narrowed to biology, and finally he honed in on molecular biology. To move forward, he needed a graduate degree, which he was eager to complete. It would allow him to do research in an important field that fascinated him. So far, so good. We discussed the grad programs he was considering, and I strongly suggested he visit the various schools, wherever practical, to make sure he found the best choice for him. But he then got busy and didn't even find the time to go to the schools within a couple of hours' drive. I later suggested he check out the publication records of the researchers with whom he might work, all available online. I have, he said, and all the researchers have publications in my field. Good. And are the publications relevant to your area, and interesting to you? I didn't look in that much detail, he said. They're all big schools. I'm sure there'll be something relevant for me. That seems like a pretty big risk, Harry, I said. For he didn't know there would be something relevant, he only assumed it. He looked confused, and a bit put out. I'm following my true passion. Though, he said. It'll work out. He left the conversation probably feeling as though I was being unsupportive, or argumentative for its own sake. Unfortunately, poor Harry ended up with the supervisor from hell at the school he chose, conducting research in an area in which he had no specific interest. All he'd gained from grad school was a credible degree and research experience of no value to him as he sought employment. Indeed, the research was so unambitious that it didn't come close to reflecting his passion. Harry found himself at the bottom rung of a very tall ladder. To illustrate, one of his peers, an unimaginative workaholic whose parents had chosen his specialty for him, was already several rungs above Harry. When I saw Harry again, he was prepared to listen. Fortunately, though his passion was bruised, it was otherwise intact, which is not always the case when a career goes off track. We discussed how to get his momentum back and tactics to allow him to pursue his goals effectively. But he had to start again. Another student, Sandy, came to see me because she wanted to switch her undergraduate focus to the skilled trades. She loved working with her hands, and sitting at a desk in a professional workplace seemed too much like what she'd already done as a student. She knew it wasn't for her. Her choice was well-reasoned and could lead to work that was both satisfying and, usually, well-paid. Again, so far, so good. Then she started acting like Harry. Which skilled trade are you thinking of? I asked. Any of them, she said. That's a bit like attending university and saying you'll take any class, I countered. Skilled trades are very different from one another. The training is different, as is the nature of the work and the working conditions themselves. The work of a bricklayer is quite different from that of an electrician. But they both work with their hands, don't they? Sandy asked. So I should enjoy either one. Sandy's entire strategy was based on that single element, and while it was a good justification to move toward the trades, she had much homework still to do before taking action. In the end, Sandy applied for all kinds of apprentice positions and trainee positions. She chose one merely because it seemed best. In short, she didn't do her homework. Now, ironically, she's back staring at a computer screen, in the very type of job she'd most wanted to avoid. Donald finishes out my trio of homework shirkers. Donald's passion was meteorology. What are the job conditions like for meteorologists? I asked. I think they're pretty good, he said. Sensing he hadn't researched properly, I pushed. Where exactly do they work? How many work in a given place? How many job openings are there? Usually. Prof, why are you trying to discourage me? This was his first and really only reply. Passion had so colored his brain that asking a question about his career choice was considered discouraging. Do you see how dangerous this impulse was for Donald? His brain had gone on holiday. Donald, I'm not trying to discourage you at all, I said. I just want this information so that we can discuss your next steps. Look, Professor, the job conditions don't really matter. I'm determined to do this, and I will, no matter what. I cannot count how many times I have heard that line, career planning by clique determination. Of course, the purpose of my questions was to find out how high the hurdles were, so he could plan how to overcome them. Instead, he was just going to run fast and fall down hard, no doubt. Again and again, I've seen scores of passionate people run after their dreams, their sight obscured by the fog of passion. They sprint ahead without knowing the most basic information about their goal, from pay scales to entry requirements to the number of potential employers. The fault is not the passion. It is simply the lack of homework and the discipline to get that homework done. Mistake number 4, do you struggle to communicate about your passion? Tony wanted to enter advertising. She very carefully explained to me why. She found it so engrossing. She had mapped out a very appropriate educational plan, one that showed a clear understanding of the job market. After she graduated, the problem was, Tony had poor communication skills. It took her a lot of words to make her point. She repeated herself frequently, and sometimes it was difficult to follow the thread of her argument. And I knew from our previous meetings that several of her summer job interviews had not gone well. I gently made this point and inquired whether she had considered her communication skills as a possible obstacle. Oh, yes, Tony said. That's why I'm so glad I've finally found my passion. I waited for her to continue. That's why she was glad, because... But she had no more to say. That was the full extent of her reply. As we talked more, her thinking became clearer to me. Since she'd found her passion, she believed people would find her words more compelling, more persuasive. I recognized this argument, since I once believed it myself. When I was too young to know better, I had assumed that if you were speaking of a subject in which you were passionately interested, the words would naturally flow. You were, after all, speaking from the heart. But I learned when I started teaching that a lot could go wrong on the long way. From the heart to the mouth. Yes, I loved both economics and teaching, but I was so nervous I mumbled. That and my shyness were badly slowing me down. Indeed, these deficiencies could have simply stopped me from achieving my goals. So I needed to fix these problems, or to give up. I decided to fix them. I figured out what I was doing wrong. I redoubled my preparation. I reminded myself what I'd liked in teachers when I was a student. I stopped standing at the podium like I was a statue. With a lot of individual corrective steps and practice, I gradually got better. Unfortunately, I meet many people who are either unable or unwilling to put in similar effort. Perhaps they don't believe they can. Professors are notoriously guilty of leaving their communication problems unaddressed. Many of them truly love their subject areas, although their students would be surprised to hear so. They stand in front of the classroom, looking bored and disengaged. But they just can't properly express their enthusiasm, and their students are poorer for it. A professor might be able to get away with this failure, but Tony, headed for the advertising industry, would not. Her chosen career would require her to be very articulate about herself and about her ideas, in front of both her employer and their clients. Before she could succeed, Tony needed to learn how to communicate much more effectively. Indeed, among all those pursuing their passions, communication is essential. If you doubt me, consider the story of Mo. Mo loved software development. He saw code as musical poetry, and he made it sing whatever song he wanted. The more complex the function he needed to deliver, the happier he was. At least, he was happy at the start of his career. He entered the job market with multiple offers with serious compensation. Mo was so in love with software development that he bubbled over with new ideas. Indeed, being innovative is often a characteristic of the passionate and one of their most valuable characteristics. Remember, they cannot stop thinking about that which they love. But here is where the problems started. Unfortunately, Mo was limited in his ability to explain clearly, efficiently, and persuasively why his new idea should be implemented. It didn't matter whether his idea was narrow or broadly focused, since he couldn't make a compelling case either way. Naturally, Mo became progressively more frustrated. I wonder if I'd have been better off just being a code monkey, he said in my office one day, referring to the commodity coders who were, of course, utterly dispensable. I knew he was feeling particularly frustrated that day, and that he was trying to be provocative, but still, the thought should have never been in his head. He had learned painfully that passion was not enough to get his ideas taken seriously. Mo admitted he sort of knew he had this communication problem. But I don't know, he said. It's hard to imagine taking time off from work I love, just to get training and to practice talking. Do you really care about software innovation? I pushed. Because if you do, you'll do what's necessary. It wasn't his passion that was the issue, it was the discipline needed to work on his weaknesses in order to take his passion to a higher level. In this case, I'm pleased to report, Mo took my feedback to heart and put a concerted effort into building his communication skills. He has been promoted several times, and his frustration has abated mightily. He can now express the ideas that his heart and brain attach to so easily and express them with eloquence. One of my all-time favorite stories on the subject of communication comes from my former student Ryan. Ryan truly wanted a great career, and he wanted everyone to take him seriously. So he took himself very seriously. Among other things, he never smiled. Curiously, he spoke easily, was helpful, and looked you in the eye. He was even friendly, sort of. But he never smiled. He came to see me when he started to get adverse performance reviews. He was being rated as a poor team player. Ryan protested that this just wasn't true. I always try to contribute, he assured me, and I believed him because I knew him well. When I noted that perhaps his demeanor was taken as disdain by his colleagues, he announced that this is simply how he was. Of course, if he'd come from a horrendous family situation, he might have an excuse for so somber a face. But he did not. So there was little choice but to tell him that doing a great job was just not enough, and that the obligation was on him to reach out to his team. No, he did not have to be the life of the party, but he had to build a better personal brand for the world he was living in. Without a doubt he struggled with this issue, but he was determined to have a great career. His girlfriend coached him. And he learned how to smile, sort of. He worked especially hard on adopting a more engaging conversational style, making sure his team members understood that he liked working with them, because he did. Very occasionally, he even tried to be funny. Basically, he made sure he was not being misunderstood, and sure enough, promotions followed. See, these aren't all sad stories. Mistake number 5, are you simply running with the herd? Billy wanted to be a lawyer, a goal that reflected his passion. He was attracted both to the intricate and historic structure of the law and its ability to guard the vulnerable. Added to this package, the adversarial nature of legal practice appealed to his competitive nature. So he happily headed off to law school. That's when we first met, and that's when, I'm afraid, I made him unhappy. I asked about his plan, and it was exactly as one would expect. Get a legal education, serve the apprenticeship his jurisdiction required, pass his final bar exams, and apply for positions. He knew that the better his marks, the more likely that he would get an offer from a major firm. And he was prepared to consider practicing in a smaller firm, since it might offer a wider range of interesting legal problems. Billy fully understood the established pathway to a legal career, and he seemed determined to achieve it. But I had to tell him how competitive legal practice was becoming, and that, in many places, an increasing number of graduates was saturating the market. What's your plan to deal with the competitive nature of your occupation? I asked. I'll study more, so I get better marks than the others, he said. Oh, and what will your classmates be doing? He admitted that they would be doing the same thing. So, I continued, are you intending to score better on your exams than they will? Yes, I hope to. Well, anything having to do with Hope Luck's better dressed brother stresses me out, so I proceeded to stress Billy out. Why should I be the only one stressed? I asked him to admit that he was relying on luck for the success of his career, on hope that he would graduate with classmates who just happened to be less committed, less intelligent, less focused, and less disciplined than he. A heroic set of assumptions, is it not? Now he was really unhappy. But what can I do? First, of course, he had to stop running with the herd. He'd received good advice about how to be a lawyer, but no one had really talked about the competitive legal job market. Billy had sensibly talked to several lawyers before applying for law school, he told me, and they were all encouraging. Of course they were employed. In fact, though, Billy did have a sense of how competitive the field was. I wasn't the first to break it to him. But he admitted, I try not to let myself think about the competition because it's so depressing. And you might also be happier if I didn't remind you of this issue so often. But what's even more depressing than thinking about competition is being defeated by failing to think about it. By pursuing his career in the very same way everyone else was, by following the herd of other law students, Billy was putting himself at risk. He needed to look for an edge. Since the law follows a prescribed route, Billy couldn't leave any of the normal steps out. He just had to add extra ingredients to make his plan more than a hope. For example, as soon as he began law school, he needed to figure out where he would serve his apprenticeship and start lobbying for a position. How? He could build personal relationships with lawyers in his chosen firms. How? He could get creative. Maybe he could concentrate on smaller firms and find a sole practitioner looking for a staged succession. There was a long list of possibilities. But Billy really hadn't given this any substantial thought. In other words, Billy needed to sell himself aggressively from the beginning, when his classmates were merely studying in the law library. Fortunately, his competitive nature finally kicked in and a rather wicked grin came to his face. Billy came to the realization that there were battles to be fought outside the courtroom, and they could begin at once. Billy looked and felt much happier. Anyone entering a competitive field, which is now almost all fields, and will shortly be all fields, needs to stop just doing what all the other students and applicants are doing. And the same necessity applies for the ability to control your working conditions, including the time commitment, and for getting a promotion after you have the job. My point is this: if your passion leads you to be in a competitive field, the sooner you start thinking of a way you can stand out or distinguish yourself from the rest of the competition, the better and happier and more successful you'll be. That doesn't necessarily mean just being at the top of your class. It's more about finding that perfect opportunity to apply your skills in a way that allows you to truly follow your passion. Some discover this reality when they stop getting promotions. Indeed, it's this promotion issue that so baffled my former student Josie, who worked for a firm that engineered hardware. She did not realize the extent to which she was running in place. When she came in to talk with me, she was disappointed because she'd repeatedly failed to get a promotion. "I don't get it," she explained. "I get all of my work done effectively, efficiently, and on time. I work well with everyone on my team. My performance reviews are good, and I work on whatever suggestions for improvement my manager gives me. But still, nothing. No movement." "Do you do more than you are asked to do?" I asked. "Yes," she said. "But the problem is, so do my co-workers." Logically, that would mean she needed to take her game up another notch. Clearly Josie was in a well-run organization where the standards for everyone were high. She would have to do more to stand out, not just more work, but better work. She needed to come up with a suggestion, a way to innovate to help her company. Josie really didn't like that advice, and she recited a litany of reasons why innovation wasn't in my job description. If it had been, I wouldn't have taken this job. I'm not creative, I've known that for ages. I met her protests with silence, and so she continued talking. "Plus," she said, "my innovation might fail, you know, and then I'd be worse off. And it's not like the company trains us for innovation or anything, so they obviously don't value it. I mean, no one else is doing it. No one else is doing it." Of all of Josie's questionable points, this one was key. She did not want to be doing anything her co-workers were not. "Why are you so sure no one else is doing it?" I asked. "Maybe that's how some people are getting promoted." "Doubtful," she scoffed. "Okay, then why are they getting promoted, when you're not?" She shrugged. "I have no idea." "Josie," I said, "you work for a hardware engineering firm. Your firm repeatedly introduces new products, of course they're interested in innovation. They have to be." "Yes," she said quickly, "but not in my division." She folded her arms. Something was going on with Josie, clearly, and it became obvious to me that she was deeply uncomfortable doing anything different from others. She felt safest sticking close and, as a result, she would never stand out. She concluded that she would just have to work harder, without having any definition of what that meant. She was wedded to following what she saw as her workplace norms, and that was the end of it. If this were the Leave It to Beaver 1950s, Josie would have been fine. But it isn't, and she wouldn't be. Remember, if you want to get ahead, you're going to have to do something or create something that allows you to stand out from the herd. That's how you will succeed. We cover this topic at length in Chapter 6. Mistake number 6, are you allergic to a plan? I know the word plan isn't sexy, it doesn't call up exciting, liberating, or free-spirited images. I'll even admit that it might hint at boring, something you'd expect, say, a staid Canadian professor of economics to recommend. And indeed, I'm such a believer in a well-considered career plan that the entirety of Part 2 of this book is devoted to the subject. But before we get there, you should know that I've been surprised at just how deeply negative the response can be to having a plan. For many, the thought of a plan is actually painful, if not scary. I'm not sure how this word got such baggage attached to it. Perhaps it's because people so want to believe their destiny is up to fate and not within their control that they feel threatened by the very idea of taking the reins. Suppose you devise a plan to accomplish an important goal and it fails. The failure then falls squarely on you and belongs to you. On the other hand, if you did not plan, you can just be unlucky, and thus, a victim. Everyone sympathizes with a victim, right? When I ask students and alumni about their career plans, I usually receive one of three responses. 1. I have a plan. Or so they say, when most of the time they do not. 2. I don't need a plan, but oh, how they do. Or 3. I can't make a plan, but, of course, they can. Let's take these responses in turn. I have a plan. Bob was one of the alleged planners, and, as it turns out, he was an urban planning student. So of course he had a plan. He wasn't at all afraid of the word. The plan was this: Step 1, get an appropriate education. Step 2, get a few good cooperative education internships, and Step 3, apply aggressively. Did his plan have the flexibility to accommodate a change or evolution of his interests? Did it describe how he would distinguish himself from his classmates? Did it describe how he was going to choose and reach out to priority employers? Did it accommodate the possibility of grad school? What benchmarks was he using to decide if his plan was on track? How would he respond to graduating in a recession and finding no jobs available? He had answers to none of these questions, and yet a good career plan addresses more issues than these. Well, actually, he did have one answer. Professor, he said, if any of those things happen, I'll deal with it then. Dealing with a circumstance when it happens is the opposite of planning. A plan tells you in advance what you will do in various scenarios and makes sure you are prepared. I told him he was needlessly subjecting himself to risk. I told him that every time in past decades that the economy has weakened, I've been literally mobbed by students seeking guidance. Often the advice I give involves an action that they should have taken already. But because they waited too long, the best we can do sometimes is damage control, making sure that their career progress is not even further slowed. Let's play this out. During these downturns, many students suddenly conclude, often correctly, that they should go to grad school. Now they need letters of reference, but none of their professors knows who they are, because they haven't kept in touch. Deadlines for applications are days away. They scramble like crazy, sometimes forcing a reference to write a generic letter instead of the more effective customized and personalized one. In their haste, they frequently pick a grad school that is not ideal and miss scholarships for which they would have qualified. Economic downturn aside, I also encounter students whose interests have changed over the course of their education. But because they never imagined such a possibility, they are locked into a program of study from which they cannot extricate themselves without great cost. Of course, I try to help them make the change, but it is often far more costly in time and money than would otherwise have been the case. And sometimes the cost makes the students give up on their newfound dreams. I explained all of this in detail to Bob the urban planner, and ended with, "Bob, do you want to take that risk?" He concluded that he did not. With visible reluctance, he committed to make a real plan. In truth, he looked like he was about to have a tooth extracted. But at least he was ready for it. Betty was another supposed planner. She had done pretty well so far, in that she had worked in a career she enjoyed for a decade. The only problem, she noted, was that the workload was very high, and her personal life was suffering. I asked how she was planning to fix that. "I'm taking courses and trying to work more efficiently," she replied. "How will the courses help the workload issue?" I asked. "Oh, well, the company encourages us to take more training," as she said. This, she frowned, as if she could see she hadn't really thought it through. "I guess the link to easing my workload isn't totally clear." I nodded. "If you work more efficiently, might the company not just give you more work?" "Possibly," she admitted. I continued with my badgering, which she took with good grace. I asked if her plan took the company's most strategic goals into account. Was her plan addressing the company's biggest immediate problem? Did her plan describe how she would craft and sell her personal brand? Again, there were no concrete answers. So in effect there was no plan, just some vague initiatives. That's better than doing nothing, but not by much. Betty reacted proactively to these questions, and she quickly began a real plan, one that saw her using her unique skill set and viewpoint to tackle the company's biggest challenges strategically, putting her in a position to better advocate for the hours and workload she wanted. I don't need a plan. There are many people who say they do not need a plan. Why? Because their career is on track to success. With no problem, they assume there is no need to plan. Of course, this just assumes that nothing bad will ever happen to you. Lurking behind this assertion, I suspect, is the superstition that, if you plan for a disaster will indeed happen. Therefore, if you make a will, you will be dead by the end of the week. I am very sensitive to the wreckage that results from unexpected career mishaps because so many people seek me out when that happens. Sometimes I can persuade the complacent to develop a solid plan. Sometimes, I cannot. Remember John, from chapter 1, who was classified as a 9 to 5 ER and summarily laid off? Originally, John was one of the bold ones who did not believe he needed a plan. Everything was going great, after all. Then he suddenly found himself out of work. He had let his network erode, his finances were locked into high spending, including a big mortgage. His wife had an excellent job, and therefore his choices were limited by his desire to stay local. His skills were very focused and did not easily allow related work. We cobbled together a plan for him, and through his own great effort, he secured another reasonable job, close to his passion. Oh, but did I mention that he commutes an hour and a half each way every day? He's close again to doing what he loves, but farther from an ideal life. The lesson here? Have a plan. I can't make a plan. Those who fall into this category and say they cannot plan, even if they see the need to do so, are represented by Ella, a student I met exactly once. She is fundamentally a fatalist. What will be, will be. While that might be a good song lyric, it is a terrible life choice. Yes, Ella can give you all sorts of reasons and cliques for her adamant refusal to plan. Life is chaotic. You never know what will happen next. There are too many factors to think about. The best you can do is to cope. While I undertake a good debate with relish, and I value the differences of opinion that spark them, the reality is that Ella and I have nothing to say to each other. When she finds herself out of work, she is likely to buy a lottery ticket instead of making an appointment to see me. As you might imagine, I'm not a big fan of that approach to life, and I feel that people like Ella are making grave mistakes. Mistake number 7, are you losing sight of your plan? If you have developed a good career plan, you must still stick to it. Just like a diet plan or any kind of plan. Unfortunately, even those who create good plans still end up improvising their way into the future, because they often lack the discipline to persevere. They change their desires as quickly as they change their clothes. Or when the journey becomes hard, they retreat to what's easy. If you're surprised to hear how often planning and discipline are coming up in this inspirational book about career, don't be. I want to do more than inspire you. I want to see you through to success. I've told you some stories in this chapter that haven't had the happiest of endings, although all are still stories in progress. But if you've been paying attention and answering the questions in this chapter honestly for yourself, you can bypass these mistakes and go straight to the positive slant. Here are some do's to act as antidotes to the don'ts. Keep your passion and your life well-rounded. Be clear that while passion is necessary, it is not all that is necessary. Do your research and your homework. Present yourself and your passion in a way that engages others. Always ask, what is everyone else doing to get from A to B, and how can I do it differently? Look upon planning as the sexiest thing in the world. Then have the discipline to stick to it. Toward this end, the next chapters change course from mistakes and talk about what to do. And there is a lot to do. Part I of this book has aimed to clear the clutter and to set the stage, so that the deeper work can be done. After all, walls need to be cleaned and primed before they can be painted. Illustrations need to be penciled before they can be inked. And, as I've just returned from helping my family make maple syrup, firewood must be stacked, equipment cleaned, and trees monitored before the sap can be collected. If you think making maple syrup sounds complicated, you're right. Imagine how much more complicated career success must be. So now that we've done all the necessary preparations, let's get our hands sticky and get to work. And that's what we'll be doing through the rest of the book. Hard questions, honest answers. 1. When you considered the 7 questions of this chapter, did you answer yes to any of them?